Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1257 of the War News stream. And today we've gotten some very big news. There's been massive damage in Sochi, Russia, after Ukrainian drone attacks. Also, U.S. officials are now threatening India over Russian oil purchases, and Iranian officials revealed by accident today their nuclear plans to build a nuclear weapon. And it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we've been able to hear more significant developments from the Baltic states and the Eastern European nations, especially the Republic of Poland, of their continued eventual preparations for a large ground conflict with the Russian Federation. With a large amount of the countries in Europe viewing this as an inevitable certainty, we have seen that a large amount of the countries that directly share any kind of a direct land border with the Russian Federation or the Republic of Belarus have started to massively prepare their armed forces and defensive fortifications for the conflict that they believe will be coming here in the near future, most likely within the next few years. We have also been able to hear in significant news and developments that there have been significant strikes conducted by Ukrainian armed forces on the city of Voronezh and the city of Sochi, as we have been able to hear that vital supplies of fuels near to the area of Sochi and Adler were hit last night by Ukrainian drone forces, knocking the fuel supplies out entirely, forcing aircraft to be grounded within the surrounding area, and also causing a significant amount of damage to Russia's airspace and air power projection abilities, at least within the area of the southern and western regions of the Caucasus Mountain Range. We have also been able to hear the exact same time that the United States of America is putting significant pressure on the Republic of India, as it's now been heard that some Russian vessels are actually mooring at Indian ports and offloading their Russian oils as a part of the Shadow Fleet, in clear violation of the upcoming sanctions and tariffs that will soon be implemented against any trade conducted with the Russian Federation around the world by the United States of America. We have also been able to hear that the Iranian Deputy Speaker of the Iranian Parliament today has announced that for years now, the Islamic Republic Republic of Iran has been working towards a nuclear weapon, and the Islamic Republic of Iran is continuing to work towards a nuclear weapon. Once again, completely dispelling any rumors to the contrary that the Islamic Republic of Iran was not attempting to conduct any form of nuclearization, as we are now hearing it once again directly from the Islamic Republic of Iran's government. In the meantime, we have also been able to hear of some significant news inside of East Asia, as we were able to hear that the People's Liberation Army Navy and the Russian Pacific Fleet did conduct naval exercises today inside the Sea of Japan, and we've once again been able to get direct sources and corroboration for the statement by the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Republic of China on the island of Taiwan that the Communist Chinese do plan on an eventual invasion of the Taiwanese mainland to attempt to retake the island by force. We also have some additional archival footage of the tsunami, and also additional news that another volcano has gone active on the Kamchatka Peninsula just today as a result of the earthquakes and the aftershocks that have been hitting the surrounding region. We have a large amount of news to be covering over the past 24 hours, and of course today was an incredibly significant day in terms of news developments like every other, and we are going to of course be covering each and every single bit of news and information that we've been able to collect over the past 24 hours in the greatest amount of detail that we can. But before we even get into that, I do have to say that tonight is the Sunday Night Fundraiser here on this channel, and the Sunday Night Fundraiser is for none other than Nova Ukraine, an amazing nonprofit that has been helping out in Ukraine for years and helping to get Ukrainian civilians away from the front lines, an incredibly important thing in cities like Pokrovsk and Torrance currently, and also providing them with shelter and food. And not only that, Nova Ukraine also provides a version of a GI Bill through their very own nonprofit to the soldiers of Ukraine, so that way they can have a chance after the war to be able to have a successful life for themselves and their families. So please make sure to support that fundraiser, because the support goes entirely to Nova Ukraine and is a massive benefit to the folks out there on the ground, both the fighting soldiers in the fields and also the civilians who are currently escaping the clutches of the Russian armed forces. But nevertheless, we are going to be moving on into the major news that we have tonight, and we have been able to hear that the Eastern European nations are continuing to work towards their preparations for war. As many of y'all do know, the situation in Eastern Europe has continuously deteriorated over the past several years as the Russian-Ukraine war has continued to grind on. The Ukrainian armed forces have shown something that has been incredibly surprising to a great deal of the Western world, in that the Russian Federation, as a propagandized military giant, is not necessarily the military giant that they were originally believed to be. And after 3.5 years and over 1 million casualties inside of Ukraine, it's become incredibly clear that the Russian Federation's military abilities in the offensive were greatly overstated by propaganda value before the war in Ukraine in 2022 began. However, the threat of a Russian conflict reaching the greater depths of Eastern Europe as a whole, threatening Finland, the Baltic states, and Poland, is still an inevitable likelihood, as we are continuing to see that the Russian Federation is preparing through more so administrative actions for an eventual conflict with the greater Western world, or largely the NATO alliance as a whole. We have especially been able to see this in the formation of the Leningrad Military District, which is generally believed, although the military mission or purpose of this military district has never been directly publicized or broadcasted by the Russian government, this is the only military district in the Russian Federation that physically borders NATO states along its entire length, largely meaning that we could assume that the Leningrad Military District has been charged with the special responsibility of preparing for an eventual war with the NATO states in Eastern Europe, and to also be able to amass resources and war plan for that eventual certain outcome. We have also been able to see that the Russian Federation has continued to build up a larger amount of forces, slowly yet surely, over the past several months and largely year on the Finnish border, the borders of the Baltic states, especially Estonia and Latvia, and we've also been able to hear of a large mass of Russian soldiers being based inside the Kaliningrad Oblast, an exclave of the Russian Federation between Lithuania and Poland. Not only that, we have also seen that they've been joined by the armed forces of the Republic of Belarus, which have been continuously conducting military exercises near to the city of Grodno, which is directly along the area of the Suwalki Gap, a vital connection and supply point for the NATO forces inside the Baltic states if a major war was to break out. All of these things considered, and also the additional intelligence that the public has not been provided, has led many government officials throughout the entirety of the Eastern European states to sound the alarm publicly, stating that all information and intelligence is leading them to believe that the Russian Federation is slowly yet surely preparing for a larger war with the Eastern European states in NATO, and largely creating a full-blown world war between the Russian Federation Federation and NATO as a whole. The Republic of Poland has been one of the largest believers of this eventual certainty, and the Republic of Poland, as a historical nation, has had a great deal of issues, generally with their surrounding neighbors, and of course, none could be so greater than that of the Russian Federation or its predecessor states, such as the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire. The Republic of Poland has a historical relationship with the Russians that could be considered a negative at best and absolutely hostile at worst. And for this reason, the Republic of Poland has taken an action today that actually was not expected. To quickly show you all this, the Polish armed forces are some of the largest inside of Europe currently. And to quickly show you all at least a little bit of a breakdown, this is how big the Polish army is. These are not battalions like you would see in the U.S. armed forces structure for, say, somewhere inside of Europe, like this. For example, our Atlantic Resolve Rotational Division that is inside of Poland. These are 2 brigades, and then it breaks it down into battalions from here. This is the force structure map for U.S. forces in Europe. On the other hand, Poland's armed forces are so large, their basic element, at least here on this graph, is the brigade, and dozens of them. You can see that they go on forever and ever. The Polish army is one of the largest currently standing inside of Europe at this moment, and could be considered a fortress nation in itself without any greater support from the Western world, or largely the NATO alliance as a whole. Poland has now decided today to announce the expansion of their armed forces to an even larger degree, one that is actually unbelievable, at least at this moment, as the announcement came out quite literally just hours before the stream. The Republic of Poland is now going to be signing a new contract with Hyundai Rotem to produce another 180 South Korean K2 main battle tanks, the K2 Panther. This deal is worth about $6.7 billion, with 61 of these main battle tanks being assembled inside of the Hyundai Rotem facility currently in Poland. Now with this additional growth of tanks and armor that the Polish are already requisitioning at this moment, this means that by 2030, the Polish army will have a tank force in size that is as great as Germany's, France's, the United Kingdom's, and Italy's combined under one single armed force. This is actually the largest standing armed force in Europe currently, not only in terms of the armor, but also in terms of the artillery, the air defense, the overwhelming number of infantry that are currently in the Polish Republic's armed forces. It is truly a fortress nation, if any could be described as one, and it is of course in one of the most critical areas of the Eastern Front, at least at this moment, which is directly along the Suwalki Gap. The Suwalki Gap is expected to be where some of the heaviest fighting will occur in an outbreak of war with the Russian Federation, and largely serves the very same purpose in the modern day as the Fulda Gap did inside of Germany throughout the entirety of the Cold War. The war could actually be decided within the very parameters of the small stretch that is the Suwalki Gap in itself, meaning that the Republic of Poland has an incredibly important job to protect this gap at all costs and to remain it open so that way NATO forces, supplies, and reinforcements can continue to funnel into the Baltic states and allow for them to continue to fight against the Russian offensives breaking out at Narva and other areas along the borders of the nations of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania as they come. This is something that appears to be one of the largest objectives that the Republic of Poland is working towards, at least at this moment. And also considering that if the war was to break out, beyond the U.S. forces, which are currently based inside of the small Polish town of Bolesławiec, which I'm mispronouncing greatly, but you can see the training fields just to the north of the city here that are a part of the major grounds that make up the U.S. Army of Europe and Africa that is currently based inside of Poland, which would take days to make it to the active fighting lines near to the area of Kaliningrad and Suwalki. Other European forces, such as the Germans, the French, and the British, would still be even further days or maybe even a week away from being deployed to the active front lines, meaning that Poland will be on their own fighting the war against the Russians and the Belarusians if it does break out for most likely the first opening days, and before the full NATO force can be brought to bear, possibly even 2 weeks. For that reason, that is why Poland is building up their forces so significantly. It also does appear that at the same time, we have started to hear some murmurings that the U.S. Army of Europe and Africa may be greatly expanded after August 8th. We cannot really confirm this, but this is largely rumors at the moment, because we do understand that there are 2 armored brigades that are currently under the Atlantic Resolve Rotational Division's administrative structure based out of southeastern Poland, but we have been able to hear that this army is expected to possibly be grown out by at least another armored brigade being added into its ranks after August 8th as an additional deterrent or generally conventional standoff ability against the Russian Federation if a conflict was to break out into the area, and further bolster and fortify the Polish armed forces' position within the opening days of the conflict. This is something that we are still going to be largely gauging and seeing, but even still beyond that, the Baltic states are also making their efforts as noticeably as the Polish as well, as we have been able to see that the Estonians are continuing, it's almost an insane degree at this point, to fortify the Narva River Bridge. This bridge is the only bridge crossing that I generally was able to find and know of, at least at the moment, between Estonia and the Russian Federation. There are some minor border crossings at the city of the town of Henza, as well as the town of Kudula, which could also be crossed by the Russian Federation. But as far as the northern corridor of advance is concerned, this is the only passable bridge between the Russian Federation and Estonia, meaning that its capture intact by Russian forces would be a devastating blow to the Estonian defense forces on the other side of the river in Narva, and could allow for Russian armor brigades to rapidly spring forward out of Narva and start racing down the highway towards to the city and capital, Tallinn, of Estonia, as well as most of the major population centers within this northern area of the country. This is once again showing us that, at least at the moment, Estonia is also taking all available measures and means to be able to fortify the only bridge crossing within this area, and to once again try and deny the Russian Federation another offensive axis which could be used, or axes that could be used, to try and start pushing deeper into Estonia if a war was to break out. Once again, I do have to make it clear that war is not going to be breaking out within the next few weeks. Well, actually, that might be a little bit of an understatement. It probably won't be breaking out for at least the next month or two. We're generally going to have to see how August 8th goes once the new load of sanctions are implemented against the Russian Federation. We will generally have to see how they react to that to even get a good understanding of what will be coming from then. But at least at the moment, we are understanding that the Baltic states and the Polish are doing every single action that they can within their power to be able to prepare for this conflict and make it as difficult as possible for the Russian Federation to even have the element of surprise working in their favor. But this has led a lot of people to start asking a significant question. What would NATO's strategy be if this war broke out in the very near future? Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so it looks like about 38% said they're going to let Poland respond first if Russia does invade a Baltic state in the very near future, while 37% said it'll be a slow and full NATO ground response that should take maybe a little while actually to get rolling, and 18% said it'll probably be diplomacy first and then military action after diplomacy fails. So this is a very big question right here. This is basically crystal balling how NATO would respond to a hypothetical Russian invasion, and honestly, I believe what would happen first is Poland would be allowed to basically be the first response force, because you got to remember, for NATO Article 5 to be invoked and also actually put into action, basically, they have to convene a meeting of the NATO members, and that will take about a day or so. For example, back during 9/11, when the first time, or actually the only time in history that Article 5 has been invoked, it took about a day, about 24 to 48 hours to invoke Article 5 after that attack took place, and then we immediately engaged in military action in the Middle East. So that was the only time in history that Article 5 has been invoked, and that gives us an idea of exactly how long it would take if everybody was on the same page to get that article in motion. So generally speaking, I believe it probably would be left up to Poland first, but it will be followed up with a full NATO ground response, potentially, depending on how the diplomacy goes. Hopefully, though, the West wouldn't flounder on that and try to negotiate with Russia first, because they might try to do that. In my opinion, that would be futile at that point, because if Russia's gone crazy enough to invade a Baltic state, then Putin's clearly lost his mind. So hopefully they wouldn't try to negotiate, but you really never know. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would generally have to say that I would be with the 37% extent that are saying that a slow, full-scale NATO ground response would occur. And as in slow, it would take most likely 2 weeks for the full force of NATO to come to bear on that front line. But if there is the outbreak of a full-scale war between the Russian Federation and NATO, this is going to be such a large and wide-sweeping confrontation that there really would be no way for the United States or the whole of Europe to not respond. The Russian Federation would be opening up multiple fronts along the Republic of Finland's borders, the nations of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, as well as Poland, all simultaneously. It would not be a limited military action where one offensive is started at a time, as the Russian Federation will largely understand that time is of the essence, and the element of the surprise is the only sort of advantage that they would have against NATO forces in the outbreak of a full-scale war. For this reason, the Russian Federation would have to move rapidly, meaning that all offensives would be started simultaneously at the exact same time, similar to the way the war in Ukraine started, with all offensive axes being sprung forward at the very same time, at the very same hour of the very same day of February 23rd of 2022. That would be something similar that we would see across the whole of Europe, because we do have to make it quite clear, folks, that the Russian Federation's armed forces are in incredibly dire straits, materially and also personnel-wise. There are not a large amount of well-trained or battle-hardened soldiers that are currently serving in any of the units inside of Kaliningrad or inside of the borders near to the Baltic states or Finland. These are largely mobics, which are mobilized conscripts, which generally serve a 1-year contract at maximum and then exit the Russian Federation's armed forces. This means that their training is minimal, and the only thing that they will have going for them is the fact that they will be the ones to strike first. A nation that strikes first in a conventional sense, especially in ground invasions, has a massive upper hand advantage. Usually, the other's armed forces, or in the Russians' case, the enemy's armed forces, will not be deployed at that moment, meaning that there will be wide swaths of ground that are quite literally uncontested at that moment, that they will be able to advance through and try and capture and then hold the ground for the eventual counterattacks once the enemy's armed forces begin to mobilize and prepare for those counterattacks. That means that the Russians actually do have some time to make ground, at least within the opening days of that conflict, if the Polish are not able to stop them. After that, however, their advantage starts to quickly deteriorate. Considering the conscripts are usually incredibly low in terms of morale, their fighting spirit would be weaker, and also due to the fact that their higher-end military equipment is limited in actual physical numbers, and the amount of replenishments or reinforcements or resupplies they would also be able to access are also incredibly limited in number, their fighting effectiveness would start to rapidly decrease over the opening weeks of that conflict, meaning that counterattacks would be highly likely to succeed, and they would most likely start to get pushed back into Belarus, Kaliningrad, and also back out of the Baltic states, possibly, and back into the Russian Federation. This means that if NATO sees that a war breaks out, it would be the smartest thing to respond, because we're not entirely sure where the Russians would stop, and at that point, we would also have to assume that, considering that they would be using the necessity of time as an advantage, they would also be striking at any forces within the Baltic states and Poland, and that would also include the U.S. forces that are currently based inside of this town in Poland. I'm not even going to attempt the pronunciation. I have a lot of respect for the Poles. I don't want to butcher a name of a town inside of their country. Nevertheless, they will be striking at this base, which is within southeastern Poland, which you can see right here. This is the town that this division is generally based out of, and this is generally the training ground that this force operates out of for training and usually the basing of its forces. It's within the southeastern region of the country. If Poland is attacked, we would generally assume that the Russian Federation would also attack the U.S. forces at that base, meaning that the United States would be responding in a defensive manner at that point, and commanders would most likely have the initiative on the field to be able to respond and defend their forces appropriately, and also move to the fighting line to be able to prepare to defend the Republic of Poland along with the Polish armed forces against the Russian offensive. That is also to point out as well that there are small contingents of British, U.S., German, and Polish armed forces that are scattered around the Baltic states at all times, generally as liaisons or training guidance for the Baltic states armed forces. if the Estonians, the Latvians, and the Lithuanians were attacked, and we generally would assume that the Russians would open up with a kamikaze and cruise missile volley, much like most countries do at the outbreak of war, to try and hit critical systems and knock them out at the very outset, they most likely would be targeting the small companies or battalion level elements that these NATO forces would have inside of the Baltics, which also means that at that moment, most NATO countries would be officially under a state of war or under attack, at least at that time. So that generally means that NATO wouldn't have the kind of ability to sit there and go, well, maybe we can just pretty much lump sum sell off about half of Eastern Europe, because they also would be under attack simultaneously due to the proximity and location of their forces within the region. Generally meaning that they would be at war effective immediately once the first Russian cruise missile and drone volley opened up on Eastern Europe, but it would still take a couple of weeks for most NATO forces to be able to funnel their way into Eastern Europe, either into the Baltics, Finland, or Poland, to be able to operate their defensives and then conduct their counteroffensives not long after. But still, that would generally be at least my outlook on the situation at the moment, and I would say that the chances are incredibly high that because of the amount of NATO forces from most Western European countries like Germany, France, the UK, the United States, and also the Dutch that are currently in the Baltics and Poland, the response would be imminent and largely would not be up to decision, at least in my opinion. But with that, I also understand that a lot of people are talking about how the Russians would start the war. What would their first opening action be? And Matthew, what are people thinking about that as well?
All right, so this is another big question. Once again, it's a hypothetical. We're not trying to fearmonger here. I see some people saying, oh, this is fearmongering. This is just going through the hypotheticals. This is what NATO planners have to do when they're preparing for a potential conflict between Russia and the Baltic states. So it looks like about 56% said Russia would start a conflict with the Baltic states, meaning NATO, by firing drones or missiles into those territories. About 25% said Russia would ground invade the Baltic states. And 14% said Russia will never do this, and it's entirely out of the question. So, hypothetically speaking, I would say the most likely way, in my personal assessment, that Russia would start a conflict with NATO would most likely be firing intentionally drones or missiles into one of the Baltic states. You got Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. It could be one of those states that maybe drones or missiles are fired into, and Russia could phrase it as a warning. They could try to sell it to everybody as, oh, we're just sending a warning to NATO. But of course, that would kick off a war. So the big deal is, here's the big dates that we're looking at right now. In September of this year, Belarus and Russia are going to hold military exercises known as Zapad 2025. That is a window in which Russia could try to invade one of the Baltic states. That is the exact same type of exercise that was conducted back in 2022 that served as the final preparations for Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So it's not out of the question to say that that is a very high risk that Russia could pull something like that off in September, but I would say it's a little less likely than Russia merely firing drones into those Baltic states and starting a conflict. So I'm with the 56%, and I'm solidly in that camp. But Enforcer, what say you?
Now, I'd have to really quickly read y'all off this as well, because Matthew is very astute in observing this. This is from the European Union's parliamentary question session, and this is the answer about the joint Russian-Belarusian military exercise Zapad 2025, which is coming up here within the next month. According to information from various countries' defense authorities, a joint Belarusian military exercise is scheduled to take place this autumn. Previous Zapad exercises were characterized by significant buildups of military forces near NATO's eastern border, including direct simulations of attacks on the Baltic states and Poland. According to official sources, around 13,000 troops are expected to take part in Zapad 2025. However, experts and intelligence analysis suggest that the actual number could be significantly higher. In view of the current geopolitical situation, this year's exercise could feature even more brazen provocations, including scenarios involving the use of tactical nuclear weapons and accidental incursions by military forces into EU territory. At the same time, there is a risk that the exercise could be used as a cover for an actual military escalation. And that is a direct statement and answer from the European Union's Parliament. So if you think we're fear-mongering, this is actually something that is being considered at the moment, because military exercises are the perfect guise and cover to be able to prepare for military offensives into enemy territory. Now, I do have to remind you all that the Russian Federation started the war in Ukraine by conducting a simple military exercise that consisted of multiple elements of the Russian armed forces and the southern regions of Belarus and around the Ukrainian border. And on February 23rd of 2022, it was found out that that was not a military exercise. That was the preparation for a full-scale invasion of the state of Ukraine. Military exercises are the real excuse and an actual excuse that has been historically used to be able to prepare and build up forces for the invasion of an enemy country without setting off alarms. The Russian Federation has to move their forces into position in large numbers to be able to prepare for an armed invasion. How in the world do the Russians explain that away to the countries that they were about to invade that would clearly see that as a preparation for invasion? They simply explain it away as, oh, well, this isn't any actual war. This is just us training for a war that we might eventually conduct against you all. That's how they would generally explain it away. That's what happened a lot during the Cold War. That's what happens a lot in the modern day. And so the Polish and the Baltic states would go, this is incredibly concerning, and we feel like it might be a preparation for invasion, but we really can't respond to this or start striking them outright, because what if they're actually saying the truth, and what if this really is a military exercise? So then this allows the Russians to build up their forces with a reasonable explanation as to why they're doing it, with the amount of arms, provisions, munitions, and personnel required for an offensive, without anyone actually having the diplomatic ability to be able to justify a first strike or a preemptive strike against the Russian and Belarusian armed forces. This means, much like the European Parliament is saying, that this could be a guise for the greater deal for an eventual armed conflict with the greater whole of NATO. And so for that reason, we generally would understand that if the Russian Federation was to start out a war, which is a decent certainty, well, not a decent certainty, but it's a likelihood at the moment. We don't know how certain it will be if it does break out. But beyond that, if they are to start a war, how in the world does every single war start in the world? Let's think back for a minute, and let me remind all of y'all and jog your memory on how every single war, major one, has started recently. The Gulf War started with the United States opening up on Baghdad with F-117 Nighthawks, dropping munitions directly onto key Iraqi missile defense sites, power plants, and other critical military systems and infrastructure around the city of Baghdad, pretty much knocking out the Iraqi high command's ability to command their armed forces, at least at that opening moment. If you also remember, in the outbreak of the India-Pakistan border war, both sides opened up with significant volleys of cruise missiles and drones being fired at the other. If you also remember about Thailand and Cambodia, that conflict also opened up with significant airstrikes being conducted in response to Cambodian artillery barrages by the Thai Air Force, which once again are fairly deeper in range in what they're able to strike and hit. The war in Ukraine itself in 2022 opened up with a large missile barrage from the Russian Federation, attempting to knock out critical military infrastructure and critical infrastructure in general to completely debilitate the Ukrainians' ability to fight or command their forces. Every single modern war in our present age, from the late 90s throughout the entirety of this 21st century, has always been started with an attempt at a decapitation attack through large uses of cruise missiles or, through that matter, drones. We also understand, to add this in as well, all of the Iran-Israel wars, including the 12-Day War, all were conducted with the Israelis and the Iranians opening up the conflict by significant drone and missile strikes on each other, once again trying to target and destroy top officials, top military facilities, and also critical infrastructure that allows for both states to function. Every single example that we have in the contemporary age is showing that the Russian Federation, if they open a war with NATO, will be firing off a great deal of cruise missiles and drones into these Eastern European states to attempt to knock out as much equipment and as much personnel and command abilities that they can at the outbreak to leave NATO forces disoriented and damaged, so that way their offensive will have a greater deal of success, at least within those opening hours or days. So generally, I would assume...
Also, you have to remember as well that you might notice that Vladimir Putin is meeting with Lukashenko, who's the leader of Belarus, quite a lot recently. And also, there's been some really notable developments as well. There's been a security pact that was solidified back in December of 2024, which reaffirmed the military alliance between Belarus and Russia. In case Belarus is attacked or Russia is attacked, those two countries are going to work together. So that was solidified just merely months ago. And also, there were the statements and reports out there that tactical nuclear weapons were moved into Belarus Belarus as well, which gives them some level of not really invincibility, but I guess some deterrence factor in Belarus. And all of that is strategic. So, me personally, I'm still not a big believer in the idea that Russia would want to run right into an invasion of the Baltic states. Invasion seems a little less likely to me. But what does seem likely, though, is Russia might try to at least missile or drone attack one of those states to try to test the waters, or maybe even try to tie up NATO in that region without necessarily going into a full invasion. Because we also have to remember as well that Russia is short on manpower right now. They're also having to really put all their weapons into Ukraine because they don't have a whole bunch right now to play with. That's why they're having to really lean heavily on North Korea, because they're really struggling right now. They're trying to ramp up their drone production and they're getting there, but they're not quite there just yet. So they really can't afford to reallocate a ton of troops over to Belarus to invade the Baltics, because that's just really not something that's feasible right now. So that's why I say, even though the ducks look like they're lining up for an invasion, it's probably still not the most likely option that they would take if they really wanted to start a conflict with NATO.
Possibly so, but there also is a decent amount of chances that the Russian Federation could use to be able to start off an offensive on the Baltics and generally NATO. We do understand that there are about roughly 300,000 to 500,000 Russian service members inside of Kaliningrad alone at the moment, and that's been a generally stable number over the past few years for the large part, ever since about a year and a half or 2 years ago. And we also understand that there's about 110,000 additional Russian service members stationed in forward operating bases along the Finnish border, and even an equal number along the borders of the Baltic states of Estonia and Latvia. So there certainly is a lot of available manpower, at least at the moment, in that area. There also has to be a consideration that the Baltic states' armed forces are incredibly small. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania all host armed forces that in size are only around the category of maybe 20 to 30,000 strong across the entirety of all branches of service of their armed forces. This means that these armed forces are incredibly small, and at least in terms of an attacker's advantage, which generally most countries in the modern age look for a 3-to-1 or 5-to-1 attacker's advantage to be able to conduct an offensive, the Russian Federation at this moment, at least concerning the Baltic states, would have that attacker's advantage. Not only that, there's not really any NATO forces that are based in large number throughout the Baltic states. They are incredibly small, usually a battalion level element or smaller of most countries that are inside of each, meaning that Estonia, Latvia's, or Lithuania's combat power is only augmented by additional NATO forces in a very small number, less than several thousand, or a brigade-sized unit extra in each country. This means that Russia actually would have a decent chance at conducting an armed offensive in the Baltics, and within those opening days, be able to take a large swath of the territory, or might even possibly be able to seize the Baltic states almost in their entirety, with small pockets or sieges being laid to Tallinn, Riga, or other larger cities throughout the Baltic states. There is also another consideration to be added in as well, that the Russian Federation does not have to have, at least at the opening of that conflict, a large amount of supplies or provisions to be able to support it. Considering that they will be conducting pretty much an unsolicited surprise attack against NATO with absolutely no warning or telegraphing of the shots to follow, NATO is going to be taken by surprise, and much like Ukraine's armed forces had to deploy from their barracks and straight to the front immediately, and also try and organize their defensive lines, which takes time and also is generally done in a fighting retreat for the large part, the situation in NATO would be the same, meaning that they would be able to take a decent amount of ground, at least within those opening days, and then NATO will have to respond from that point on. Firing missiles into NATO as a standalone strategy or tactic would be incredibly poor, because the Russian Federation would be risking at that moment whether or not NATO is going to join in full in an Article 5 declaration against the Russians, or whether they would back off, meaning that Russia is gambling a lot. It's a 50-50 chance it could go either way. And if NATO decides to unanimously declare an Article 5 invocation and the entirety of NATO goes to war over the drone or missile attacks that occurred on the Baltic states or Poland, that means the Russians now have no buffer zone between the Russian border and NATO forces, and they pretty much allowed the ball to be in NATO's court to be able to respond to the warlike actions that the Russian Federation just took. So generally, in my opinion, if they're going to be firing drones and missiles, they're most likely going to be going all in with an attempt at a decapitation attack with those drones and missiles being fired, then followed immediately by ground offensives.
Yeah, this seems like it would be a very desperate move to make. Even though Russia could technically try to pull it off, it would be very desperate to try to invade the Baltics, at least in my opinion. So I believe these Zapad 2025 Belarus-Russian military exercises, which I will admit, it does look really, really disturbingly similar to the pre-invasion of Ukraine. Like it looks very, very similar to the point where it really makes you quite worried to think surely Russia wouldn't actually pull that off, like and try to invade like the Baltics, because that would be a little bit crazy to say the least. That's an understatement. So maybe Putin's using it as a contingency plan. If things keep going terribly bad for Russia, and let's say this deadline that the U.S. has imposed comes up and all of a sudden we put secondary sanctions on the Russian Federation, that might be maybe like, I guess you could say, Putin's version of a dead man trigger, that if Russia is put into such a bad position that they'll do something as drastic as invade the Baltics just to get NATO tied up in a war in that region. I guess just to try to create chaos, I guess, because maybe Russia was on the verge of failing as a country as a whole. I'm not really sure. It just seems to be crazy, reckless if you actually did it. But it's certainly possible, though. I mean, it's definitely not an impossibility at this point. It's certainly a reality.
I would have to say that it certainly is a reality, and if the Russian Federation does get into significant financial destitution in the future, there is a decent likelihood that the Russian Federation could start to act erratically in an attempt to try and save itself from its inevitable fate. If the Russian Federation is going to be facing an economic collapse that will threaten the stability of the central government, it is highly likely that they may start to decide that if the Russian government is to be destroyed and pretty much their existing chance to rule, largely Putin's existing chance to rule, begins to fade in his lifetime, he may decide that it would be better to take down the West in response, if necessary, to be able to try and save the Russian state. It may also be likely that the Russian Federation will not go to war and largely decide that it's futile due to the U.S. nuclear deterrence policy that's been taken recently and may just quietly fade into obscurity, much like the Soviet Union did. But either way, at this point, the Western states in NATO and those in Eastern Europe must be prepared for all inevitable circumstances that may start to arise from the situation of an ailing and collapsing Russian Federation. And so we do see that a lot of these Eastern European states are preparing for the likelihood that the Russian Federation may decide to break out a full-scale conventional war against NATO at large. So with that, I hope that generally covers the situation in Eastern Europe, or as far as NATO's deterrence policies in Eastern Europe at the moment, as we have also been able to see of some significant news directly coming out of the Ukraine war in the meantime. But I also want to point this out as well. If y'all are ever thinking that the Russian Federation and Poland's military relationships may be a little strained, we were able to see this inside of Gomel today, which was a BTR that appeared to have had red square markings on the side of the APC, also cope cages as well, generally showing that this APC may have been moved from an active theater inside of the Ukrainian front and into the Gomel region just north of Kyiv in Belarus. This may be suggesting the Russian Federation is attempting to build up offensive forces in this area for an offensive on Kyiv, or that they may be transiting through the country in general to be able to make it to the area of western Belarus for preparations of the Zapad 2025 military exercises. Nevertheless, that is a Russian APC present inside of the region. That's the end of that clip. But moving on from that and out of the southeastern region of the Republic of Belarus, it's time for us to move on down into the Caucasus Mountain regions, as we've also been able to hear of some fairly significant developments around the city of Sochi. We were able to hear that overnight, the Ukrainian armed forces were successful in attacking and destroying the aviation-grade jet fuel storage facilities at Adler in Sochi, knocking out all air abilities and air projection power for the Russian Federation around the Sochi-Adler area. We actually were able to see an aircraft coming in today, and it actually did show us the fire that was going on at the depot. Not long after this flight landed, all flights within the surrounding area were grounded and were not allowed to take back off, meaning that this is really the only chance at a bird's eye view of the attack that we were able to see from an incoming plane. We see the fires there at the fuel depot. And that landing kind of sounded like a Ryanair landing with how hard that plane hit the tarmac. Nevertheless, we were able to hear that there is now a shortage of fuel at the airbase, or largely the airfield, as some departing flights from Sochi are now being forced to make additional stops at alternate airports for refueling due to the shortage of aviation fuel now seen in the Adler fueling zone, which is a part of the Sochi fueling area. We also were able to hear as well that flights are being almost outright canceled and redirected later after the attack, possibly suggesting that fuel is now so short within the area that even domestic commercial flights, which were pre-scheduled, are now having to cancel their flights due to the complete lack of fuel.
This is becoming pretty common in Russia at this point. It seems like air travel is becoming something that is certainly not reliable after all these drone attacks are taking place literally constantly.
Man, honestly, in America, these sorts of things are seen when there's a situation in the domestic sense, a lack of air traffic controllers or bad weather. In Russia, it's because of enemy attacks on their airbases as fuel supplies and other things. It's actually a little bit nice to see that the Russian Federation is dealing with a great deal of logistical complications and difficulties. And also, it is continuing to show us that the Russian Federation has no air defense, or air defense that is on the job. There actually is air defense, much like the Ukrainians have apparently in Russia, gun-based, tentacle-based air defense systems. This is what they were doing the night that the Sochi airfield's fuel facilities were attacked. This is the camera showing them right up there. And you see them just kind of wandering around the truck. It's a tentacle mounted with what appears to be an NSV machine gun, or maybe something lighter than that. It's really hard to tell. But this is a Russian air defense tentacle on the coastline at Sochi that was supposed to be able to defend against these kinds of drones. And we could see that in the midst of the attack, the guys who were supposed to be manning this truck and also shooting down these drones were just wandering around having a day of it. They weren't doing anything.
Also, how lazy, too. I thought the FSB was on top of things. Apparently, they don't even realize that these publicly available webcams are literally available for everybody to see on the internet. They're literally giving away the positions of their entire air defense systems.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy, honestly, to see that, because apparently they did have some air defense, and we do all know that machine gun-based air defense systems are effective, at least in the sense of mounting them onto a truck and pretty much driving them around to wherever a drone's going to be flying in and attempting to shoot down the drone. Ukraine has proven to show that that is incredibly effective. Beyond that, however, the Russians don't even have their guys paying attention in the midst of an attack, or they weren't even told an attack was going on or what to do. So in the middle of the attack, they're all just sitting around, and the drones are slamming right into the fuel depots, and nothing is happening. They're not trying to shoot down the drones or anything. So it generally disproves the claim, actually, that the Russian Federation has no air defense. Technically, they do. It's just that they're generally on lunch break or something like that every single time the drones are coming in. Outside of that, though, there was also another little piece, well, two pieces of drama that happened around Sochi in the course of this very day that this attack happened. One, we were able to see a large waterspout formed in the coast off of Sochi, seen here, which was pretty crazy. And then, secondly from that, the next one is quite truly comedy gold. You won't be able to find anything like this except for in a place like Russia or maybe Turkmenistan. But we can see here the water spout once again from another angle. By the way, this happened the very same day the fuel depot was on fire. Very same day. So Sochi was like the apocalypse down there. There's fires, there's water spouts. I mean, it's a crazy time down there. But in the midst of it all, some Russians that were on the great app known as a Chinese communist propaganda app called TikTok were out there, and they were working hard. The FSB works hard, but the TikTokers work harder. In the area of the fuel depot near to Sochi, there were some TikTokers that happened to wander out and see the fire burning, and they ended up filming it. And it was amazing. Take a look at this, folks. Take a little gander. Here they are. I can't play the audio because it's copyrighted, but here they are here, trying to look all chic and stuff in front of the camera with a fuel depot burning behind them. We can also see the local crackhead there in the background. Don't really know what he's up to. And I don't even know what the hell... I don't know why they have to look into the camera in the midst of the fire. I have no clue. But beyond
that... Cringy, man. Cringy. I don't even know. This is like the brain rot's gone global. It's crazy. The young people everywhere do this kind of stuff.
But not that long after, they were caught, and then the FSB put a picture out of them at the police station. Now, here is my question, folks. Here is my question. Watch the original video. They're all at the same height. Did this girl get on her knees to be at the same height as this girl? Like, that's my question.
Oh man, wait a minute. Go back to the video real quick.
See, they're the same height in this video.
Man, I tell you what, I think something is amiss here. Also, why they look so different in the photo at the police station? Like, go back to the police station. They look the two females look completely different. Like they don't even look the same hardly. And also that guy on the right over there, he looks somewhat similar, I guess. But I don't know. He's going to the front lines though. Like I know the Russians, they're probably gonna be sending him to the front lines. He's gotten some deep trouble.
Also, by the way, this guy fits the Gopnik stereotype. He's wearing an Adidas tracksuit, even in the picture they took of him being arrested. I mean, now that is quintessential Russian right there, if I've ever seen it. But still, beyond that, though, I am just absolutely confused. Like, how the hell they're all the same height nearly, though, in this video? This girl had to be crouching to be the same height as this girl. And this guy also had to be crouching, too. So, like, did they have, like, some sort of, like, beyond the whole fact that they got arrested for filming this, did they have some sort of a plan where the other two taller ones were supposed to crouch down to look like they're the same height as the main girl with the camera? That's really the question that we should be getting to the bottom of here. But beyond that, they did film them making an official apology for filming the fire and trying to make fun of it by being in a video. But here is the clip. They blurred out her face. This is the main girl, the blonde one that was the one holding the camera. But this was the official apology that the Russian police forced her to make for filming a fire that hundreds of other people filmed throughout Sochi when it broke out. But here's the clip.
Снимала видео в социальную сеть TikTok со своими друзьями.
Кому переслали видео?
Присылали видео на работу.
I regret filming TikTok, showing the image. I regret it so much.
And the Russian police officer is like, "You regret it, don't you? You regret it badly, don't you?" And she's like, yes, I really don't, but I do.
Содеянном раскаиваетесь?
Да, раскаиваюсь.
Вину свою признаете?
Признаем.
For some reason, they blurred
Why'd they
them
blur
out.
their face here? Yeah, why'd they blur their face here when they literally just had a photo of them in the hallway like before without being blurred? And also, is dude over there on the right wearing some Yeezy slides or something like that? I thought they hated the West.
Dude, what the hell? Dude, those don't even fit his feet. Like, his feet are like a good inch below, like, the strap at the top. So, like, when he walks around, is there like a telegraphed amount of time where his flip-flop's still on the ground, but his foot's actually moving off the ground?
Maybe so.
I have many questions about these people, really, beyond the fact that they got arrested for this. I have a great deal of questions.
Приносим свои искренние извинения за то, что снялись видеоролики на фоне горящей и выложили в соцсеть. Ролик не выкладывали с целью кого-то оскорбить или обидеть. Обязуемся больше при таких ошибок не совершать. Видеоролик был уже удален.
Oh, they're getting a good dressing down here.
Готовы понести наказание по законодательству.
You will all be turned into cannon fodder for front lines. Glory to Russia. But beyond that, it does appear that at least the Russians were on top of stopping people from filming the fire at the fuel depot. Thank God they stopped that. I mean, wouldn't that be terrible? Wouldn't that be like a huge PR disaster for Russia if that went out, that an entire fuel depot critical to the functioning of aerospace in that area was knocked out of action? I mean, that would be terrible. I mean, that's nowhere near to as bad as the fact that the fuel depot got blown up and they now can't fly aircraft anywhere around that area. I mean, that would be a lot worse if the story got out than the fact that the damage happened. I feel like the FSB ought to be spending their time maybe going around to those air defense crews or the Russian army and asking them why they didn't shoot down the incoming drones, and then getting on to the goofy teenage kids that were filming on TikTok the fire at the fuel depot. I feel like they have their priorities mixed up a little bit. But nevertheless, though, it does seem a lot of people are talking about this little incident, which actually pretty much got international notoriety today because it was so ridiculous. And a lot of people are starting to talk about the FSB arrest that was made today at Sochi of the TikTok stars. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that in general, about Putin's perceived crackdown on free speech and internet access in the Russian Federation? And what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so now that the FSB decided to invest so much time arresting these TikTok stars that took a video in front of some damage in Sochi, is it proof that Putin is cracking down on the public significantly? It looks like 59%, the popular option here, said yes, Putin is cracking down, while 24% said no, it's always been this bad, and 11% said I know nothing of this. And I must admit, it seems a little bit wild because, of course, these are basically I think they were like 19 and 20 years old, so they're like barely adults. They're almost like children out here taking a TikTok video. So I would say for the FSB to invest this much time in arresting some kids out there doing a video in front of a fire, was it a poor choice? Yeah, it was probably a poor choice. Was it cringy? Yes, it was absolutely cringy. But was it worth going through all that trouble? Absolutely not. So I would say it is proof that they're either cracking down or they've either been like, I guess you could say, just wanted to target the kids for some reason. I'm not really sure, but I really don't understand why the FSB got so messed up by it, because it really didn't show anything that wasn't going to show up on the internet anyway. We were obviously going to get photos of the fuel depot on fire. It always happens. So I guess they just want to make an example of them for some reason, which I really don't understand. But I'm with the 59%. And Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I do believe that Putin is cracking down, and unfortunately, nobody in Russia will be able to know that Sydney Sweeney has great genes, because that's most likely going to be blocked from being seen in Russia. Not only that, they're also stopping the fact of the matter of anyone actually publishing anything in Russia that may be showing that Russia is not doing that good in the war, like the TikTok stars down in Sochi. I actually think that this may be a direct extension of the crackdown that was already declared yesterday, and it does appear that that is the case. But still, it's absolutely ridiculous to arrest someone for filming a stationary target on fire, because it's not like they're giving away the exact position of the fuel depot. I mean, you can literally find the thing on Google satellite. Really quickly, let me go down. Let me go down here. Hold up, folks, to the airport, because I can actually find this for y'all. It's not that far from here, at least from what I recall. Let's see here. Where is it? Let's see. If they were landing, they were coming in. They were coming in and landing, and the fuel depot was somewhere around here, right near to the airport. I'd be dipped. I'm having a hard time finding it this time. Why in the world is it, Matthew, that every single time I try and find it, I always have... Oh, here we are. There they are, right there.
Aha, yes, right there.
Yeah, so it's not really like they're giving away some sort of an operational security secret here. It's literally something that you can see on satellite. And considering that hundreds of people filmed it, I mean, we had dozens of clips of this today, and we only curated it down to a few. It's not like they saved the day and stopped the spread of the information that the facility was hit. It's gone everywhere at this point. So I don't really know what the point...
Do you think maybe they just arrested them because it was so cringe they couldn't take it or something? Honestly, here's my question. I'm somewhat young. I'm 25 years old. I've never been a TikTok person. I'll say that. But what was the intent behind making that video? Because it was the three young people standing in front of the Russian fuel depot burning down. They're obviously Russian. The two females and the one male standing in front of the video there. So what was the point, to mock their own country burning to the ground, or what? Because I didn't even really understand what the point of it was.
I'll be honest with you, I don't really understand a lot of anything that's on TikTok. I'm never really on TikTok. As an anonymous throws in a $500 donation and has just gotten us hundreds of dollars away from the fundraiser goal. Holy smokes. A huge shout out to that anonymous viewer for throwing in such a massive donation tonight. Very big thanks to you, because that's going to be helping folks out in Ukraine. But beyond that, I don't know, man. Honestly, I have no clue. I think it's just due to the fact that, they were out there, and they put their face on the camera, and that's why they ended up getting them. I don't really know, but still an absolutely wild sort of a thing right there. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, because it does appear that at least at the moment, that seems to be the best sort of an answer that we could get out of that. But moving on out of that, and moving on out of the Ukraine war for a little moment, it's actually time for us to move on out into the Republic of India, as we have been able to hear of major diplomatic developments that are now happening here today. We all thought that the whole thing of India purchasing Russian oil was over, but alas, it isn't, and it looks like we are revisiting this one, because the great victory of yesterday is the defeat of today. But before we get on into that major diplomatic news of what's been going on in the Republic of India and East Asia and the Middle East and in the rest of the Ukraine war, we do have to take a moment to be able to address the fundraiser, because it's gotten up to $2,215 raised, and we are less than $300 away from reaching the fundraiser goal. And Matthew, really quickly, who are the top donors that have gotten us to this point so far, along with everyone else who's supported the fundraiser? But sadly, there's so many people who support, we can't call y'all all out personally by name, so we limit it to the people who put in anywhere over for a $50 donation. But I still want to say to everyone, before we call out the top donors, that each and every one of y'all, whether it's $1 that you're throwing into the fundraiser or thousands of dollars, each and every one of y'all is making your impact. If it wasn't for the 50 people who were throwing in $5 donations or $1 donations, a significant chunk of the fundraiser would not be possible. Unfortunately, there's so many of y'all who throw in smaller amounts of support like that, it would be physically impossible to be able to call all of y'all out by name. But I do want y'all to know that we are greatly appreciative for all of y'all for y'all's support to these fundraisers, because big or small, y'all are all coming together to help this fundraiser to be possible and get incredibly close and right at reaching the goal, as Just Chillin' threw in a 275, and we're $10 short of the goal. $10 short. I thought we were going to be there. We are. Oh,
300 from
we
Anonymous.
hit the goal.
Look at that.
Goal!
Go, Jack. Go.
It was the greatest fundraiser ever run, but beyond that, it's an amazing thing to see that we hit the goal. A huge shout out and a thanks to everyone for supporting the fundraiser tonight, and you can continue to support it, but we hit it. So Matthew, who are those top donors of tonight's fundraiser?
All right, so we did have a 500 from Anonymous and also a 300 from Anonymous, and obviously we don't know who they are. Also, by the way, a huge shout out to Tyler Weaver, who just threw in a 100, by the way, and we are now officially well above the goal, which is fantastic to see. But like I was saying, unfortunately, we do not know who our Anonymous donors are. So whoever you are, big shout out to you, because that, of course, was a huge boost to the fundraiser, and we're now well above the goal. Also, a big shout out to Just Chillin', who just threw in a $275 donation, along with Hal Rose, who threw in a 100, and Nick Hines, who threw in a 100 as well, along with Nightmare Before Christmas, who threw in a 50, along with the Rad Doctor, Snow White, Andy L, Joe's RV Home Turtle, and Old Warrior. And those are all of the top donors for now, and a huge shout out to all of y'all. And also Yanara for throwing in a 50 Canadian as well, literally right this second. And a big shout out to all of our donors tonight for helping us to smash the goal, and we're almost $500 above it already at this point. But Enforcer, what say you?
And I have to say a huge shout out and congratulations to everyone for getting us on up to nearly $3,000 raised on this fundraiser tonight. It's absolutely amazing to see that the Leaf Spring Army continues to support these fundraisers and hit the fundraiser goals each and every single day of the every single day that we run these things. Not every day of the week. We only run these things on Sundays. And I've got to say, a huge congratulations to everyone once again. Y'all are the reason why the Leaf Spring Army is such an amazing community, and why we're able to say the Leaf Spring Army continues to support Western and American interests from around the world. I've got to thank all of y'all so much once again for making this fundraiser possible tonight, as I hold it myself, and Matthew does as well, as a personal point of pride to know that the very people that we are covering the news on globally every day, we actually help and support as a community as well, to be able to hopefully try and curb the story to be a little bit more of an optimistic one than it would be otherwise. So a huge thanks to everyone so much once again for that. I hope that does give y'all all your well-deserved thanks, and also a big thanks to everyone who's just been here tonight as well. We reached a peak viewership so far tonight of 18.2 thousand people, and have had 100,000 people watch the stream so far within the first hour. I've got to thank all of y'all for being here as well, whether you are supporting the fundraiser or not, because y'all help us to be able to get a large enough people in here to be able to see the fundraiser and to possibly be able to support it and help out the folks overseas that need the help the most. So a huge thanks to all of y'all once again, just for watching for that matter. But beyond that, Matthew, I understand that we have a couple of questions, a couple of them as a matter of fact, and I want to make sure that we get to a couple of them before we move on into the rest of our news. So what do we got?
Also, by the way, I wasn't able to hear, but a big shout out to the Martian for throwing in that 100 in case it wasn't called off, and that was another massive donation right there that brought us up to $3,036 raised. So a huge shout out to the Martian. And we are now jumping into our questions, and it looks like, of course, YouTube still has the super chat function activated on our fundraiser night.
Dang.
So we will be addressing 4 super chats, and then we'll get to our live chats after that. So a big shout out to Nick Hines for throwing in a $20 super chat to the channel, and we appreciate that very much, Nick. We also had a 20 from John Murray, and John said, first, you guys are awesome, and thank you, John, for that. He said, just a couple of things. Our troops are spread through Poland like roaches on Joe Dirt's floor. A response would take hours and not days, and we do drills for the specific situation regularly.
And thank you for the support, John Murray. But I would have to look into the situation in Poland a little bit better, because I just generally know that we have 2 armor brigades inside of Poland, and that they are based somewhere within the southeastern region of the country, because that is the technical base that they are operating from. But I'd have to do a little bit more research and study on that to be able to speak about it to a greater deal. Because regardless whether they're spread out or not, it still would take days for them to be able to amass onto the area at full force where the front line would be. Because if some of them are in the southwestern part of the country, they have to travel all the way across Poland, and they may not be able to use the railroads because the railroads may be a target at that point. So that could end up taking possibly days, maybe. So I would have to look into it a little bit more, but I do thank you for the support, and we do constantly train for such things as that. But implementation versus drill is generally two different things. Much like we saw in Ukraine, their ability to respond, it took them about 3 full days to bring their full force to bear on all of the active front lines and to even start slowing down Russian advances a little bit at all. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. But a big thanks to you for support and sharing that information with us. And I will try and look into it a little bit more to get a better answer on that as well, and be a little bit more well-researched on the exact U.S. doctrines and policies that we currently have inside of Poland. But with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, our next super chat goes to Elliot Pinkman, and he put in a 10. He said, thanks for the channel, and I wanted to know if a military-style rank of LSA members is possible. Perhaps the huge donors become generals, and so on down the line.
And I thank you for the support, Elliot Pinkman, and that generally would be something along the lines of a channel membership sort of a deal, if we were able to make ranks like that. Generally, we try and keep the LSA rankless, because we want everyone to feel like they're just in a large crowd of people getting to chit-chat with each other, and there's no striation where, you know, someone has any more authority or leverage in the channel than others. YouTube kind of defeated that with a top fan system, though, because there are 3 people every night who get marked as top fans, but we can't really control that part. But beyond that, it's an idea. One day we might implement it, but for now, I generally will try and keep it as informal as we can, at least for everyone here on the channel, so that way it doesn't end up feeling like some sort of a striated rank structure, sort of a societal system that we have here. We just like it to be like a gang of folks got together at the end of the day to chit-chat about what happened in the news. But with that, a big thanks to you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address that well, and an interesting idea, Elliot Pinkman. And with that, we are on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to be getting on into the rest of the news.
All right. So, also, by the way, I see a lot of people saying we should do members. Well, that's somewhat to think about in the background. That's something people have asked about for a long time, but we got to give a lot of thought to that because that's a big move if we did that. So, we do see the suggestions, though. We will take them into account and take them, of course, into the suggestion box. But moving on to our last super chat here. This one goes to Bruce Lee, who put in a 2. And Bruce said, Russia getting pawns ready for a match for FAFO and LSA. Honestly, Bruce, it does seem like Russia is trying to set Belarus up to be the fall guy, basically. It's becoming so, at least in my opinion, it's becoming so apparent that Belarus is going to be basically taking the brunt of the, I guess you could say, the response from NATO if any of the Baltic states are harmed. Because what Lukashenko is allowing his country to be used as is a pawn. And Putin is more than willing to use the Belarusian people to take the brunt of the force. And Putin doesn't give a damn. Like, it's very clear he doesn't give a damn. And the Zapad exercises coming up could be maybe one of the inflection points if Putin decides to pull the trigger. So we'll have to see. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that they certainly seem to be acting recklessly in the modern day, even to the point that the European Union's Parliament, in a question and answer segment, said in written transcript that this could be the possibility of a greater armed action against Europe as a whole. So I would have to say that that is something that might actually happen. Do we want it to happen? No. And a lot of people seem to not really get that come in here. I don't know if they're bots or real people, because some people like to say to us as a question, oh, I guess y'all love war and are just spoiling for a war. We're not, but at the same time, you have to be able to see them when they're coming. I mean, you can't be so blind and deaf and dumb because of an aversion to conflict that you decide to stick your head in the sand and go, oh, no war will ever happen, because that's what a lot of people did leading up into World War II. as a great example. And everyone said, oh, Hitler wouldn't do this and Hitler wouldn't do that, and we can get peace in our time. And then the war came. And because everyone wanted to stick their heads in the sand and act like they could just avoid it or it wouldn't happen, it happened. It ended up being the deadliest war in human history. So generally, it's a smarter idea, to be entirely honest, to actually see an upcoming war and know that it might be happening. Even if it doesn't happen, even the likelihood of it is something that we need to prepare for and something we need to be ready to stand down. Nobody's like, well, like this is the best way to explain it. If you sat there and you walked out into the woods, and you said, man, I'm spoiling to just beat the hell out of something, kill it even possibly, what in the world would look easier to beat up? A newborn fawn? A deer, pretty much a newborn baby deer, which is called a fawn if y'all don't know, or a giant grizzly bear. Most people are going to go, well, I don't want to try and even punch the grizzly bear. That thing's going to rip my head off. I'll go and beat up that little fawn instead. And that's generally the same sort of an instant. Yeah, honestly. But that's the same sort of a thing that the Russian Federation would have to be considering, depending on what kind of a stance or position we're in NATO. Are they going to be beating up a fawn, or are they going to try and punch a grizzly bear and get their head ripped off? And as far as we're concerned, we want them to think that they're going to be going up against the grizzly bear, not the fawn. And that's generally why here on this channel, we are always talking about armed force preparedness inside of Eastern Europe and everything else along those lines, because that is the thing that saves your skin that actually avoids war. Lord Horatio Nelson, a British hero and the admiral that was present at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, famously said, if you want peace, prepare for war. And those words have never been truer. They are true throughout all of history. If you want to avoid war, you have to be ready to fight a war till the last bitter moment. You have to be willing to wipe out an entire country and raise it to cinder if they ever attack you. That is the only way that you can truly avoid war, is being so ready for it that a attempt to even try a conflict with your country would be futile by others. That is how you avoid war. That is also what we call in the modern day, in a more corporate or clinical term, deterrence. But that is how we actually avoid war with the Russian Federation. And that's why we need to see this clear and evident threat that the Russian Federation poses, and that's why we must always be standing them down and always threatening their very existence if they go to war with us, and make it incredibly clear that by the time that the sun rises tomorrow, there might not be a Russia left if they trifle with NATO. But with that, I hope that does address
also by the way, before we move on, I got to give a huge shout out to somebody, because I just found out who our anonymous donor was that threw in the 500 and the 300. It was a channel legend. It was Griffin Provenzano who threw those two in, by the way. And I'm not sure if YouTube robbed him of the credit or not, or maybe it was just a glitch or something. It could have been. I'm not really sure. But a huge shout out to Griffin for throwing in the largest combined super chat, or not the super chat, but the donation of the night. And that's a huge, huge credit to Griffin for throwing that in, because he literally single-handedly jumped us up to the fundraiser goal, and we appreciate that very much. Also, by the way, a huge shout out to BC Skyman, who just threw in a 200 as well. We're currently sitting at $3,261 raised, which is tremendously above the goal at this point. A huge shout out to Griffin and BC for helping to make that possible.
And I gotta say, a huge shout out to both of y'all. An absolutely incredible and amazing thing to see. And it's wonderful to know that Griffin Provenzano joined us for the fundraiser tonight. A huge shout out to you, and I hope you've been doing well. I haven't heard your name in a little bit. So I hope you've been doing well, and a huge thanks to you for supporting the fundraiser tonight. And good to know that we have you here. Also, really quickly, I saw someone. These are the kind of arguments, folks, that I just don't get. Alan Sigma said, but you shouldn't be excited to start a war, nor want war. No, you want them to think that you're spoiling for a fight. If you have the mindset, this is the issue, Alan. If you have that mindset, it doesn't matter how ready for war you look. We are ready for a war anywhere around the world in the United States right now. And the truth of the matter is, we could probably take on the Chinese and the Russians simultaneously in this modern day and age, and probably not even break a sweat, no matter how much people want to think otherwise. The issue is, though, is that China and Russia all know that America's mindset is that mindset. You should be sad about war. You should never want one. No, I say this. If the Russians want a war, I'm excited for a war. I'm excited to give it to them. At that point, we've got a job to do. We've got to defend ourselves, and that's one hell of a job that I'd be proud to do, is to say that this nation gave its best, so that way some people in this country could have many more tomorrows beyond that. If you have a mindset like that, it doesn't matter how ready you are, because mentally, you're not showing the enemy that you are ready to take that war to its completion. And to that degree, it would be completely pointless or impossible to actually try and fight or win a war against the West, because our fighting spirit would be so strong from the start. They're not only fighting an uphill battle against our technological and firepower superiority, but they're also fighting an uphill battle against our morale and our will to fight. So it is important, while war is terrible, to be in a mindset as a nation to say, if a war comes to us and someone chooses war with us, we are spoiling to bring that war back to them. That's the only sort of a mindset that works in this world. If you have a mindset like that, you're begging to be run over and stomped on by everyone, because they're going to know that, yeah, like for example, if you're a police officer, this is a good example. If you're a police officer and you've just come up against a dangerous suspect, he's armed and you just got done robbing a bank, and you sit there and go, "Oh, as a police officer, I would hate to have to take a life in my own self-defense against a suspect. That would be terrible." And you've made that clear. It's been on television, everything. And now there you are. There's the guy. He's armed with a gun. He's got a sack of money in his hands, or he's just robbed the bank. And he's sitting there, and he knows, I just saw this guy on TV the other day, and this guy is a quick shot. He could shoot me in an instant, and he would get away with it too, because this would be in self-defense. I'm an armed and dangerous criminal. But I saw him on TV the other day say that he wouldn't want to shoot me, and I know that he's going to hesitate. And because he'll hesitate, I'm going to whip out my gun and shoot that cop before he can shoot me. That's the kind of mindset that you have that would lead to that kind of a situation. Because all of our enemies know, sure, he's a quick shot, and he could definitely take us on and take us out if he wanted to, but he's not going to, because he doesn't have the mindset to do it. So because of the lack of a mindset or a will to be able to defend oneself, they'll take advantage of that and they'll run you over. And that's how the world works. So you've either got to be ready to fight to the finish, especially if they bring the fight to you, or you're just not going to be around to have a fight at all. That's the truth of it. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, I suppose that we are on to the rest of the news, Matt. Did we get all the questions? Did we get them?
That was all the questions.
All right. And so with that, it's time for us to move on into the rest of the news for the night. And we have been able to hear that inside of the Republic of India, things are changing. It was just yesterday, actually 2 days ago, that we heard that India appeared to have stopped their purchases of Russian oil. As of today, we're now seeing that they are continuing their purchases of Russian oil. Russian shadow tanker vessels, or shadow fleet tankers, have resumed their trips to India, offloading their oils, and then returning back to Russia. The President of the United States of America has now changed the story from it's an absolute victory, which this was the direct statement here. He has heard that India will no longer be buying oil from Russia. It's now changed from that to now he's saying that it's going to be unacceptable for India to continue financing Russia's war by purchasing oil from them. We have also been able to hear that India has a little bit economically at stake if they stop buying Russian oil, because according to Bloomberg, it appears that $5 per barrel discounts, which is generally what they get from the Russians, it generally makes their oil pretty cheap for them. If they buy American or Middle Eastern oil, their energy import costs are going to go up around $9 to $11 billion a year, which is a fairly significant expense for generally crude forms of energy being imported into your country. It also appears the losses could be even higher if the world prices rise due to reduced Russian oil supplies. So it does appear that the Republic of India has found itself at a crossroads. Either they relent and start purchasing Russian, actually American and Middle Eastern oil, but take a significant loss in terms of the cost of the oils and how much it's costing them as a nation, or they continue to try and purchase Russian oil, and then they may be hit with significant sanctions or tariffs that pretty much makes trade with India impossible, and their economy may start to hemorrhage hundreds of billions of dollars in terms of economic losses, potentially. So it's an inevitable loss of money to the tune of over $10 billion just about, or it is the potential for the loss of income of hundreds of billions of dollars. So we don't really know what the Republic of India is going to be doing yet, but it does appear that a lot of people are putting in their opinions on what India is going to be doing, at least in their opinion and their judgment. So Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
All right. So it looks like the U.S. was a little bit too quick to declare victory on this one because it turns out, and we had to run with it, by the way, because the statement came from, I believe, the U.S. president himself,
Yes.
or at least one of his close officials. Yeah. So we ran with the statement because it came from, obviously, the highest U.S. officials. So we ran with it, but it turns out that we also had to kind of eat our foot because he was wrong. What do you know? But anyways, the question says the U.S. has begun threatening India after it appears that Russia continues to sell oil to them. And what are your thoughts? 58% said India will not stop buying Russian oil, and 26% said India will give in to U.S. demands, and 9% said I need more info first. And on this one, I'll be honest with you, I'm a little bit on the fence. I'm going to have to actually be unsure and undecided on this one because at first it sounded like India was going to cave. Now it sounds like India is going to take billions of dollars in losses if they stop buying Russian oil, which that could be a very, very big ask to make India do that. And it sounds like the U.S. is trying to threaten and coerce India to stop buying the oil, but it sounds like it might be a harder sell than we thought. And also, the U.S. obviously declared victory too soon and had to eat their foot. So now we're kind of back to square zero, which could be a bit of a tough one for the U.S. Here's the catch, though. If India keeps buying Russian oil, China's obviously going to keep buying it. That might negate the consequences of the secondary sanctions that we're about to try to put on Russia. And if that's the case, then Vladimir Putin might be able to basically skate free after this deadline comes about and the secondary sanctions are put on to Russia. And that could pose a huge problem for the Western interest because obviously secondary sanctions, that was a huge piece of leverage we were holding over Putin, but it looks like that could get negated. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that this is a bit of a tough one. And right now, India is at a crossroads where they could potentially lose money or they are going to be losing money, and they know the figure of how much money they will definitely lose. So I would have to say that I am actually going to be within the 7% of the unsure and undecided. They have about 5 more days left to be able to decide what they're going to do. And considering that they have about 5 days left, they're probably going to try and take advantage of those 5 days as much as they can to be able to take advantage of that cheap oil for as long as they possibly can. But beyond that, I don't really know what they're going to be doing. Because if they get hit with significant sanctions by the United States for continuing to trade with the Russians, that can end up hurting them pretty heavily. Most of India's manufactories end up exporting their goods into Europe and the United States at this point. So if they have significant sanctions put on them in that regard, considering that their economy is growing rapidly, but it's not a major global economy, that could actually hurt them really badly. They could actually set them back in the Indian economic sense to the Stone Ages of the 80s and the 90s when the Indian economy was practically non-existent. So they might want to decide to take that $9 to $11 billion hit annually on oil imports to be able to ensure that they don't end up collapsing their entire trade and export system structure. Because unlike China, which is relying less and less on their trade relationships with the greater Western world, or specifically the United States, well, actually, China's number one trading partner is still the United States, actually, but unlike China, which still has a lot of economic prowess to work with, at least at the moment, India doesn't. And I want to show you all that really quickly. This is India's economy. It's at $3.9 trillion, and it's actually growing rapidly year over year. It's actually, I think, one of the most rapidly growing economies in the world currently. But this is also China's GDP, to really quickly show that off as well. China has a near $19 trillion GDP. India has about a $3.9 trillion GDP. So considering that India's economy is growing in a skyrocketing pace, a lot like China's was when they started to conduct significant trade with the West, and India's economy is also seeing that massive growth because of their trade with the West, that means, in a sense, that if they end their trade right now, their economy is going to flatten out right at this level right now, like China's has, or they are going to end up completely collapsing. So what's worse, losing hundreds of billions of dollars or even $1 trillion of market potential in terms of gross domestic product, or eating about $9 to $11 billion a year in additional fuel costs? I feel like the Indians would probably go with the $9 to $11 billion in additional fuel costs, but still, it's a little bit hard to say whether they would or wouldn't. And I don't really know how much the Indian government at this point is really thinking the value of the BRICS alliance is, because that also would have a lot of additional input or say on their final decision. And it's not to say that India's relationship with BRICS is incredibly strong. It's actually somewhat weak from what we know. But even with it being weak, do they consider it to be a value? And that could pretty much answer the question in itself. They'd rather take the sanctions than break away from the BRICS alliance completely at its hour of need, if we want to put it that way. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And moving on from that and on into East Asia for some smaller pieces of news, we were able to get video evidence of an interview that the Deputy Foreign Minister of Taiwan conducted with Sky News, where he did state in direct wordage that China will invade the island of Taiwan, and it's only a matter of when. We put that on the map just so that way if y'all didn't believe the statements we had yesterday, y'all could find it today, and also see the video of him directly saying that. Meanwhile, we were also able to hear that the People's Liberation Army Navy and the Russian Navy, specifically of the Pacific Fleet, were conducting naval drills in the Sea of Japan today, and we also were able to hear that another volcano in the Kamchatka Peninsula has gone active after the earthquake, the 8.8 magnitude earthquake that happened 80 kilometers off of the coast. We can actually see that volcano active right here. This is the second one to become active after the earthquake.
Russia's getting hit with some bad weather events too, because they're having earthquakes going off. They're having the volcano erupting. They got water spouts off of Sochi. Tsunamis hitting. I mean, the nature's not doing too good with Russia right now.
Yeah, and floods in Voronezh, which we'll be getting on into here in a little bit. But we also got to see a video that came out of the original tsunami from the magnitude 8.8 earthquake hitting the coast of Kamchatka. I'm not going to lie, y'all, this actually looks like something out of a movie, so we had to show y'all this clip. This is technically archival at this point. This did not happen today. This happened several days ago. But the video was so crazy, we have to show it to y'all. So here's the clip. When you see the tsunami actually coming in and hitting the coast at this moment, you see it hitting the coast over there, and in a second, it's about to hit directly below the cameraman. And I'm not going to lie, this guy must have had some balls to not start running, because this looked insane. And here comes the actual tsunami itself, along with its surge. We can see it hitting the coast's cliffs, and in a second, the water is going to surge so strong, it actually will travel up a large part of the cliff, right here.
That is crazy. Look at that.
I mean, just absolutely insane. The ocean's sea level within that area, because of the surge, it looked to have rised about at least 50 to 70 feet by the point in this video right here. Like, and I'm not talking about the level of this water reaching the top of the cliff. I'm talking about just the general sea level inside of that gulf. Look at the video right here. Look at how low it was right there, right before the tsunami. Look at it right there. That is at least a 50 to 70 foot increase in the height of the water, just in ambient levels in that area.
You know, the weird thing is, I think this was about 80 miles away from the epicenter, so I'm not really aware of any other footage showing a tsunami hitting this close to the epicenter like this. I've never really seen footage this close, so this might be some of the first footage we've ever seen, like in the history of recorded tsunamis, that we could actually see what the effects were of being this close to the epicenter. Like, I think the waves were predicted to be, I'm not sure, I know that 9-foot tsunami waves were expected. I believe it was in Hawaii, I believe it was. Was it Hawaii?
I think so. I think it was Hawaii, yeah.
Yeah, and that was really far away from the epicenter. That was very, very far away. This was literally 80 miles away from it. So I would, like you're saying, it looks like 50, 60 foot high. These waves actually reached over these cliffs right here. And I'm not sure if this guy has balls of steel that's filming this or he's just goofy, one or the other. But that poor dog right there was almost about to get it if it didn't run away at the time it did.
Yeah, I mean, that dog was about to get swept away. It seems that the dog was none the wiser to the whole situation happening around it. So here's the clip from that point on, just to show you. The dog is okay, folks. It didn't get swept away. And look at the seas. I mean, it's insane. The force of the waves was so strong, you can actually see that it caused a landslide on one part of the cliff over there out of the camera's frame. Watch. You'll see the dirt slide into the water right there and slam into the waves. I mean, this is just insane.
It's like a washing machine in there.
We now see him finally getting away from the cliff as the doggo was almost swept away by another rogue wave that came up the cliff.
Could you imagine if you were down there, like on the coast when that hit? You would literally, you wouldn't stand a chance. You'd be out at sea, or you'd be under the water pretty deep.
Dashed to pieces, really. You get slammed on the cliff, and then the force of the water alone would pretty much be sandblasting you into a fine mist for the large part. You wouldn't, like, like as far as the force of the waves, this is actually a crazy thing, and something I actually didn't know about, folks, until recently. Waves alone and just the force in the water can actually rip you to pieces if you're stuck on a solid object. Because I was actually listing, Matthew, the stories of shipwrecks in the past, and people would be trying to cling on to the debris of a grounded ship on a rocky coast, and the waves would just start battering them on the side of the ship. It would batter them so hard it would rip all their clothes off, and then it'd start ripping their skin off, and then it'd start ripping them apart to pieces. It's a lot of force that's in these waves. If a wave like that hits you from that tsunami and slammed you onto that cliff, you would probably end up getting shredded to pieces before you even drowned, really.
Yeah, it's also crazy because, a lot of people have like really bad nightmares about tsunamis. Like, these visions of like these massive waves that are like taller than like the Empire State Building coming at somebody from the ocean. This, I think, is about as bad as it can get, being this close to the epicenter. So this is like the nightmare scenario if you're this close to a earthquake and obviously a tsunami comes your direction. This is about as high as it would get. So that kind of makes me feel a little bit better though, because at least if you are in a tsunami prone area, hopefully there's a huge cliff next to you, because if not, then you could be in some trouble.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's crazy. The cliffs made this incredibly dramatic, but in a real scenario on flat land, the wave would have literally just rode over the beach and just continued as far on inland as it possibly could have.
Also, by the way, I see people pointing out the footage of the 2011 Japanese tsunami. I'm not really sure how close the epicenter was to Japan where the tsunami actually hit. This one was 80 miles away approximately from Kamchatka, so I'm not sure how close it was in miles in that Japanese tsunami. I wouldn't know that right off the bat.
But still, crazy stuff. Tsunamis are just a wild freak force of nature, honestly. But moving on from that and into the Middle East, we did get to hear that the Deputy Speaker of the Iranian Parliament did confirm today that they have been working towards a nuclear bomb, and they will keep working towards a nuclear bomb. We could see that the pro-Iranian bots are going hard down here in the chat trying to put out the propaganda. But if the Deputy Speaker of the Iranian Parliament is saying that they were working towards a nuclear bomb and still are, then that makes it pretty clear they're working towards a nuclear bomb. I mean, it's like, what better justification could you get? Hell, I think at this point, Matthew, I think Tucker Carlson's whole shtick is kind of running a little thin, because he's out there, I think, still saying that the Iranians weren't developing a nuclear weapon. It's like they're even admitting that they are. It's like, honestly, folks, I don't really know how much farther we could go with the due diligence of proving that they're working on a nuclear weapon. I mean, the government officials literally saying that they're working towards a nuclear weapon is proof in itself that they're doing that. Like, if they weren't working towards that, why would their government officials be saying that? That would be absolutely insane. They're literally begging to get invaded at that point. So with that in mind, it does appear the Iranians are working towards a nuclear weapon. We need no further proof than a statement from a deputy minister of the parliament. That's about the highest level that we've heard that from, at least recently. But in the meantime, we also were able to see that more UN humanitarian food trucks did enter the Gaza Strip, and once again, Hamas did steal the food. We can see them driving through the streets with the stolen food trucks in hand, firing at the civilians standing around trying to grab the sacks of flour falling off of the trucks as they try and carry it off to a Hamas storage facility to then later sell it back to those civilians at exorbitantly high prices. But here's the clip. I don't really know where the TIE fighter noises were coming from right there. And we can also see the dozer. We can see the civilians trying to grab the flour that fell off the truck as quickly as they can. The situation in the Gaza Strip is barbaric at this point. Israel largely does not bring food into the Strip and pretty much deprives the whole region of food whenever they go to war in the Gaza Strip, which starves the civilians, but it also starves Hamas simultaneously. But then, when the United Nations tries to step in as a third party, and then they provide the food, almost none of it makes it to the civilians, and almost all of it's stolen by Hamas and then taken to a Hamas storage facility somewhere inside the Strip. I mean, the proof of that is in the pudding. You can see that the citizens of the Strip, right here on the video, are having to pretty much lower themselves to that of dogs to just try and dig up the flour off of the street that fell off of the trucks, because otherwise there is literally nothing accessible to them at this point. Because either Hamas is stealing it or the Israelis aren't giving them anything in the first place. And if the Israelis did give them something, the Hamas forces would most likely steal it. It's an absolutely barbaric situation that's going on in the Strip at this point. Absolutely horrendous. It is. I would have to agree with a lot of the UN watchdogs. This is one of the worst humanitarian crises that has been seen so far within the prior years. But it's damn near impossible to deal with. Either we give them food and we end up solidifying Hamas's position like we see here, or we don't give them food and then possibly hundreds of thousands of civilians starve to death. It's a lose-lose scenario, at least at this point. I really don't know what the answer to this even would be, but it's a horrendous situation.
It seems like the most obvious answer is that the people would get so desperate inside of this area that they would eventually just rise up against the terrorist forces here. I know some people are going to be like, well, they don't have the guns. They don't have this, that, and another. But that's pretty much all they've got at this point is to rise up against them.
I would agree. It's barbaric. But that's the end of that clip. And moving on from that and on out of the Gaza Strip, I do have a big question that we've asked all of y'all about the statement from the Iranian Deputy Speaker of the Parliament about Iran's plans to build a nuclear weapon. And what are people thinking about that, Matthew? And what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so the poll that I put up here says, today an Iranian official claimed that Iran's plan has always been to build a nuke, and what are your thoughts? Basically, he said the one thing you weren't supposed to say out loud in Iran, because they're trying to keep that secret, even though everybody knows what's happening. But 73% said it's going to be more war with Iran, pretty much guaranteed. 14% said it's just yapping and the West will ignore it, and 8% said it seems bad but more manageable. And honestly, in reality, it really doesn't change anything. We knew that Iran was still going to try to develop a nuclear weapon anyway, so, this is just basically stating the obvious at this point. I guess it's good to hear them say it out of their own mouth, so that way we can confirm it. But apparently this Iranian official didn't get the memo that you're not supposed to say that out loud, or at least the Iranians are not supposed to say it out loud, but basically confirmed what we already knew. So I'm with the 73%. More war with Iran was pretty much guaranteed. It's just on a ticking clock at this point, pretty much. But Enforcer, what say you?
I completely agree with that as well, because it was clear they were working towards a nuclear weapon. I mean, how much clearer could it have been? They had uranium enrichment facilities in their country, and they were refusing to lower their enrichment rates to less than 90%, which is weapons grade. That made it clear in itself. The additional fact that the deputy speaker is now saying that they're working on a nuclear weapon. I mean, hell, Matthew, how much more proof could we have of the Iranians working towards a nuclear weapon? It's for all the people who are out there saying that this is Iraq in 2003 all over again. You would have to be brainless at this point to make that comparison, because unlike Iraq, where there really wasn't a lot of proof where they were working on weapons of mass destruction, and everyone in the Iraqi government, including Saddam Hussein, swore up and down that they weren't, everyone in Iran is swearing that they are making a nuclear weapon. There are multiple nuclear facilities that are working towards a nuclear weapon. I mean, hell, it couldn't be more clear at this point. We have undeniable proof and evidence, now even through official government statements, that they're working towards a nuclear weapon. There is no other due diligence that we could do in the West to prove that they are working towards one. And considering that they are, war is certainty with Iran. They are in violation of nuclear non-proliferation treaties. There we go. I don't know why I stammered on that so bad. I have a stammer. But they are working towards violating a nuclear non-proliferation treaty. They are continuing to say that they are going to directly threaten the existence of Israel and the United States with this nuclear weapon, and not only for the fact that they are violating international treaties, but for the fact of national security. We have to go back to war with Iran again. There is no other option, and to all the people who sit there and say that we're doing this on the behalf of Israel, they are blind, or also goofy, or maybe even stupid. I'm not really sure which one it would be, because the Iranians have also clearly said in the past that they are developing an equally intensive ballistic missile program, and have already made an intermediate range ballistic missile, and they're working on an intercontinental ballistic missile that will reach the United States. And what other purpose would they have for that ICBM if it's not nuclear armed? Every ICBM in the world is nuclear armed. So if they're making an ICBM It's because they want to put the nuclear warheads they're making on a missile that has enough range to hit you in your living room that's saying that the Iranians aren't doing that and blow you up. That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing to all of us. This is an imminent threat to the United States of America on a national security level alone. Forgetting the Israelis or what might happen to them, this is a national security issue for the United States. So we have to go back to Iran and we have to deal with the problem, no matter what it takes. Because whatever it would take right now will be far better than the idea of the Iranian regime just one day waking up and choosing to try and nuke us. But anyways, with that, it is time for us to move on out of that news in the Middle East and on back up into the Russian Federation. We were able to hear that a gas fire started in Kurgan today, but deep inside of the Russian Federation. Look at this fire, Matthew. It burned so bright. It was brighter than Russia's future, actually. Ooh.
Oh, that's a doozy.
Man, this is a doozy. Man, that thing is... Damn. I had to turn it up. That thing is loud.
At least it's contained behind a fence. You know, got to keep it enclosed for safety.
Bruh, they fenced it in so that way it couldn't jump the fence and run away. They don't want the fire running around town. That's the end of that clip, but moving on out of that area of Kurgan and on into Voronezh, speaking of apocalyptic-like weather conditions, we were able to see that there is significant flooding throughout the entirety of Voronezh. Take a little gander at this. Man, they have water spouts, they have earthquakes, they have active volcanoes, tsunamis, terrible storms, Ukrainian attacks, and now floods. Matthew, I think this might be the modern equivalent of the 7 plagues of Egypt.
This is like Mother Nature's gone to war with Russia, giving them the good old Muhammad Ali knockout on this one, honestly. This is a lot of crap happening at one time to Russia. And honestly, like floods, and where are these floods happening again?
Voronezh.
In Voronezh. Like, when's the last time Voronezh has had floods like this in the streets? Like, we're just literally standing water like that.
Not during the whole time we've covered Voronezh on the show. I've never seen this before.
Yeah, it's odd. I mean, you know, I'm not like one of these people. It's like, oh, it's like a sign or something like that. But at the same time, though, you got to admit, so many different natural disasters happening at once. I mean, it's kind of weird. Now, I will say this though: the United States has also been having an unusually large amount of natural disasters as well recently. It's like Earth's balance is detecting the instability around the world between the leaders and the countries, and it seems like nature is also going berserk at the same time as well.
It also, to be entirely honest, I think it's a larger part of the climate change thing that's been going on, because I've also been hearing at the same time that the heat waves this year nationally are a record high, to the point that they've actually reclassified New York City as a subtropical climate zone, which is the first time it's ever been classified as that in history, because the humidity and temperature in New York City as an ambient level throughout the summer. But anyways, well, you see the flooding here. I mean, look at that water. That is raging water. That's a torrent going down the street.
That is crazy, honestly. How many Russians are going to lose their only mode of transportation today by waterlocking their engines?
Probably everyone, really, honestly. I mean, it's insane, really.
That it's the hole to the pit of hell there in the middle of Russia. It's just going nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's nuts. Look at this.
That water's gotta be nasty. Oh, look, somebody's like historic Lada is taking a dive.
Bruh, it's the Lada in the Willy Wonka Chocolate River. I never thought I'd see the day, man. Look at that. That's crazy.
Man, I'll tell you, they just realized an easy way to make a sub: throw a Lada in a bathtub, and you got a sub.
Also, really quickly, I see a lot of people saying climate change. I'll explain really quickly why I said that, because the scientific theory about global warming, global cooling, or climate change has been changing a lot through the decades, because it's something that's relatively new and has never been observed, or at least the idea of emissions having any sort of an impact on the atmosphere or the environment in general. But in the modern day, the general theory behind it is that due to the heating of Earth's atmosphere, due to carbon dioxide and other forms of gases, specifically sulfur oxide and others that are starting to contain the sun's heat far greater than other times in history, at least during the time that humanity has been functioning as as an existent societal structure on Earth, that it's been heating up the polar and Antarctic caps. The thing is, though, is that when they start to melt those caps start to release thermal energy of their own, which is far cooler. So it's meeting the extremely hot atmosphere around the equator, and the cold fronts, which are extreme at this point, are approaching from the north and south, and the meeting of those extreme cold and hot fronts creates extreme weather elements. Stronger tornadoes, more tornadoes, greater floods, such things like that. That's the general theory behind it, at least. And considering that generally every single year we're seeing hotter summers and far colder winters, it actually seems that might actually be lining up a little bit, because y'all will notice, if you pay attention to the weather statistics, a lot of the top 10 hottest years or summers in history have 7 of them have been within the past 20 years in this century, and a lot of the coldest winters have also been within the past several years of this century as well. So, generally, beyond the whole politicized part of it, because I know that's a very political thing in America for some reason, I actually believe there might be some credence to that theory, especially considering that weather events are becoming extreme worldwide at this point. I mean, insanely extreme, to the point it's actually affecting crop rotations in some places. But moving on from that,
Me personally, I think it's just the natural Earth cycles. I'm not an expert on this, by the way, so if I'm misquoting something, let me know. But this is my basic understanding of it. There's different orbital cycles that the Earth will go through, called the Milankovitch cycles, and basically it's when the Earth tilts on its axis at certain different degrees, and it can change weather patterns throughout history, and it happens on a cycle. That's why they call it a cycle, obviously. So I think we might just be going through another natural cycle in history with the weather, and people are trying to put a scientific, like, new reason behind it. But that's just my personal belief.
Maybe. I see some people unsubbing over there. I mean, I can't really be too bothered by that, folks, because, it's a theory. So you either believe it or you don't. It really doesn't have much impact on anything, because is anyone doing anything about it one way or the other? Not really. So, it's just more so idle chit-chat. But anyways, we were able to see the attack on Voronezh. That's the end of that clip. And moving on from that and down into the southern part of Voronezh, we also got to see that a power line got hit by an errant Ukrainian drone. That thing got slammed.
Slamming, I tell you what. Also, by the way, someone said the Earth's always tilted. I mean, yeah, it is always tilted, but the tilt can change angles. There's a difference with that, though. I mean, here's my thing, folks. I don't profess to be an expert on it at all. So it's just my layman's knowledge. This is my opinion on it. So some people are saying, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about." I may not know what I'm talking about. That's why I'm saying I'm not an expert. So get your own honest opinion on it. Do your own research. If you want to convince us of it and make a point, make sure you go in the chat and say, "Here's what you should reference. This is what proves me correct." Instead of just saying, "Oh, I believe this just because I believe it." That's a pointless argument at that point.
Well, I would say, folks, that generally, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really think that global warming was a real thing until I went to college. And some people call college an indoctrination sort of a thing. But generally, the science sounded pretty sound. I went to a couple of environmental science classes, and one of them actually was about modern environmental science, and they explained how the theory had evolved over the years, because back in the day, it actually was thought, and this is actually interesting, because if you ever listen to the evolution of it, it made sense. Back in the day, when this first started to happen, they started to go, wow, we're having like extremely cold winters. And so originally it was actually believed to be global cooling, because the ambient temperature of the equator was starting to rise, and that was also starting to affect the temperature around the Earth. But as a result of that, that started to create more extreme winters, and that was the first observable thing that appeared to be noticeable, at least to meteorologists and scientists at the time, is that winters were becoming a little bit more extreme or colder. And so they started to go, oh, this might actually be producing global cooling of some kind. And then later, it was observed through satellite data that was provided by NASA and other institutions and weather collection centers. Actually, it appeared that the equator was actually starting to warm up a little bit more. And as a result of that, the temperatures over the polar and Antarctic ice caps are also starting to increase during the summer slightly as well, increasing cooling, but at the same time, also increasing the amount of cold air. But still, that changed it to global warming, because then it was understood that the general ambient increase in temperature by just several degrees was starting to cause adverse weather effects or something along that line. Then it got changed to climate change after they realized it's not really global warming relative all year round. It's more so an increase of temperature in the summers, and then as a result of those increases, the thermal changes in the Antarctic and polar ice caps because of the melting increases the veracity of the winters, making them colder or more extreme. So now it's called climate change. But generally, the way that it was explained and how the theories worked and everything along those lines, as it was explained to me in college, sounded reasonable. It didn't sound like it was something that was unreal. And another thing that I have to say really quickly is that a lot of people say emissions do not have any impact on the planet. But I'd have to say that generally that wouldn't really have a lot of founding in reality, because there's never been a time in history where 9 billion people have been alive on the planet at the same time, and also in industrialized society with 9 billion people being alive on the planet at a single time. If you sit in a garage with your car on, you will die of carbon monoxide poisoning. So what's to say that a mass industrialization of the planet and the significant emissions at that level wouldn't have a small but equally noticeable effect like leaving a car on inside of a closed garage? Because the atmosphere is pretty much, in a sense, a closed garage, because it's not like the stuff vents out into space. It's a contained atmosphere.
I would disagree on that one. But honestly, though, here's my thing. It's a theory. That's what they call the climate change theory. It's what they believe. But, at some point in science and history, people had a theory that the universe orbited around the Earth. And then it turned out they were super wrong on that. And people literally got persecuted over that back in the day. Kind of like some people that disagree with global warming get persecuted today, in at least in a social sense. So I don't know. Like, it's a decent theory. I'm not discrediting the whole thing, but to say that's like solid fact, like there's people out there that literally die on that hill. Like, this is true, and if you don't believe it, you're so and so. It's like, it's a theory. If it was a fact, they wouldn't call it a theory.
I mean, like, honestly, folks, I generally say I actually do think that climate change is something that may be man-made. Now, of course, we did see that the ambient temperature was slightly rising before climate change even became a thing, at least from measurable statistics. But at the same time, however, it's starting to rise drastically, like an ambient change of 1 to 2 degrees over about 70 years, which is generally unheard of throughout most of history. So, at least to me, I go, oh, well, maybe it has some credence to it. Is that going to change anything? Am I going to, start getting hyper-violent over that and saying that everyone's got to live in a mud hut and wipe their ass with a leaf to fix it? No, absolutely not. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. But generally, it does seem like it's a interesting theory, and one that I actually think might have some credence to it. But that's just my opinion. If you disagree, you have a right to disagree. But if you agree, then great. It doesn't really change much of anything.
I got a meteorologist on my side. I got a meteorologist in here with 30 years of experience, James. I've been studying this since 2002. You're mostly correct. There are solar cycles within cycles. I knew it. I'm just a layman on this. I got to defer to the experts on this one. At least I'm correct on that aspect. And thank you, James, for backing me up on that right there, because I got to take your word for it because you're the expert. So that is something right there. I think it is just cycles personally. But anyways, I'm not gonna go any further with that one, because for some reason, weirdly enough, that topic right there has gotten so polarizing to people that people literally start fist fighting and going berserk over that. I have no idea why, but anyways, I digress.
Yeah, also, I see a lot of, like, I gotta say this really quickly, people. Like, you've got to calm down. It's just a conversation. Like, if you agree with me, you agree with me. If you agree with Matthew, you agree with Matthew. You don't have to be cussing either of us out in the chat because you agree or disagree with one of us or the other. It's just a conversation. It's this conversation isn't going to turn into a boogeyman and then strangle you with a plastic bag or something like that. It's just a conversation. So it is.
Let's just move on from this one. Yeah. This one's too much.
But moving on from that and on into the rest of the news that we have from inside the Ukraine war, we were able to see within the Sochi region that the Russians were getting hit in Kursk by the 47th Mechanized Brigade. And we can see here the drones of the 47th targeting Russian forces wherever they can find them and slamming them. Also, by the way, this is an electronic warfare interference video where they're taking the drones down through electronic warfare means.
Also, thank you very much, people. People are telling me, I support you too, Matt. Thank you very much. I appreciate your support.
And we can see them here continuing to take down Russian drones in fairly large numbers.
You know the worst type of climate change?
What type?
Nuclear warming. They've been telling me about it for a long time. They said that once they start warming with the nuclear, they call it nuclear. Nuclear. The word that nobody wants to use, that terrible word. Some people say you can't say it anymore. Nuclear. Terrible word.
And also I see people like, goodness, folks, like, you gotta calm down a little bit on this one, because I see some people saying, well, science can be wrong, or science is always right. Look, folks, science is not a tested thing. Like the theory that I'm saying that I generally think is correct could be wrong. You know, science is an ever-evolving thing, and our understanding of the world around us is ever-evolving. The theory could be incorrect. It could be what Matthew's saying. It could be what I'm saying. Nobody knows. Nobody has a clue at all. It's just a conversation for the sake of it. Why you have to be mad? It's only game. Like, come on, it's not that big of a deal. But anyways, moving on from that and on to our location unknowns, we also got to see the Ukrainians unloading an FV-103.
Скрилося і ось він з'являється на світ. Ще трішки, тужимося ще
This Ukrainian is hyped about this. Yeah, it
Тужимося
is.
ще трошечки. Всі хвилюються. Ще трішки. Ну. Ну що, друзі, я вас вітаю. У нас хлопчик!
These are fairly older APC, the FV-103 Spartans, but still, they are generally a decent APC, all things considered. But that's the end of that clip, and moving on from that and into our next one, we also got to see a Ukrainian net drone capturing a Russian drone with a net. And we see the Russian drone right there, and there goes the net, and they got it. Pretty impressive stuff, actually.
That is impressive out here. Also, this is a perfect sky, not a cloud in sight on that camera view right there.
Honestly, man, it was crazy. Also, by the way, this is the Russian army as it exists in 2025 in Ukraine.
По полям, синий трактор.
Man, look at that wobbly ass wheel. What the hell? What the hell? Oh, the whole tire came off.
What the Effie?
How the hell, man? That is insane. How the hell is that tire staying beaded onto that wheel like that? That's crazy.
Man, it is insane, really. And they're dragging a Bahaka with it. Bro, how the hell?
Oh my god.
Dude, the Russian world is an insane place to live in, man.
Like a GTA lobby.
But that's the end of that clip. And now it's time for us to move on to the Russian casualty report, because we have been able to see that over the past 24 hours, there were no Bobcats lost. But Miss Deasy, keeper of the records, did say that artillery, UAVs, and vehicles are mostly consistent. The war has changed to drone-based attacks instead of tanks, and we were able to see that over the past 24 hours, 920 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed, along with 2 APCs, 135 supply trucks, 43 artillery pieces, 178 drones, and 1 cruise missile. In general, it was actually quite a good day, and it's good to see that the Ukrainian armed forces were continuing to inflict large casualties onto the Russian armed forces and hold them back. Meanwhile, on the Kharkiv front, we were able to see some Russian artillery pieces getting hit by the Ukrainian 14th Brigade.
Also, remind me never to talk about climate change ever again. My God, that's one of those topics right there that seems to, like, that's one of those, like, unknown topics that you just don't know how it triggers people. Like, this one has got people triggered right here, man. Never touch climate change again. I forbid you.
Yeah, we're not touching it again. I was looking in the chat and I was like, damn. Like, I gotta say, folks, like it's really tough on my end to see. Like, I don't really care what your opinion is on that, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, but it's tough to see people literally go like tribalistic, like Ooga Booga caveman mentality on all ends with that, like on either direction, whether you agreed or disagree with me. There was like a decent amount of people in the chat who were going absolutely feral over it. And it's like, like no conversation should get to that level. I don't know why a lot of people find that just to be the option of first resort in modern conversation, is to immediately go into just like violent rants about stuff, because it doesn't really win anyone over. Like, if you agreed with me and you did that, it doesn't really win anyone over. And if you disagree with me, you did with that, it doesn't win anyone over. It just creates a violent atmosphere over a topical conversation. But moving on from that and on down into Lehman, we did get to see the Russian forces also getting hit by the Signum unit inside of the woods. I see some people...
Is this that 100-acre wood that that Pooh and gang used to like wander around?
Apparently so. It is the 100-acre wood.
Why didn't they call it the 100-acre woods? Why did they call it the 100-acre wood? It's like it's not singular, it's plural.
Yeah, I don't know, really. And I also see some people saying, yeah, you know, it's a tough thing like that. Yeah, it's tough. Some people say, you know, it's unfortunate that it's politicized. Sadly, a lot of issues like that are heavily politicized these days. Issues that should be politicized is fine. It's fine to have a political topic that is a part of politics, but the issue is that people act like they have to fight, kill, and die over a conversational topic. It's created an environment where you literally can't bring up hardly anything anymore without expecting that you're going to have to get into a literal fist fight over it. It doesn't really make too much sense. But anyways, moving on from that, we also got to see the Ukrainians, or the Georgian Legion, involved in the defense of Pokrovsk, which we were able to see in this clip right here.
Welcome to Ukraine!
We're going to be muting that from that point on. But we can see them making it out into the open.
Also, I was turning around and realized I heard somebody talking behind my head, and I was like, what the hell? I turned around and I looked, and I realized, oh, my TV is still on over there, and it was some food reviewer guy on YouTube talking. I was about to say, who the hell is talking to behind me like that? I'm like, there's nobody that should be behind me.
Yeah, I was about to say, man, I was like, what? What do you mean someone's talking behind you? I was like, we got an intruder, man. I was like, but anyways, moving on out of Pokrovsk and on down into the area of Kherson, we also get to see Ukrainian mortar crews also shelling Russian positions on the other side of the river. And we can see them here unloading the mortar shells out of the back of their van and also conducting some anti-drone warfare with a shotgun in the meantime. We now see them preparing their mortar for the next day of operations and getting their mortar aimed and firing. We can also see them using their drone spotters to dial in their fire.
Also, I wasn't getting any hallucinations, by the way. It turns out I was listening, and somehow YouTube jumped over to a food reviewer fellow's channel that y'all might have heard of, Sonny over there from Best Food Reviews or whatever. I watch his content quite a bit whenever I have free time. So he happened to jump on the TV, and his jump scared the hell out of me. He was talking about some food from Brazil or something, I think. So yeah, that was what that was. I thought I was about to get murked there for a minute.
And also, Sonny's the guy who wears, like, the red bandana, right?
Yeah, that's him.
Oh, he's pretty cool. I like his videos. They're pretty neat.
There's one really obnoxious one. I'm not going to mention it because I'm not trying to start beef or something, but there's one out there that's kind of obnoxious. But, you know, it's his style, though, so it's cool.
Yeah, it's a style. A lot of people beef these days. We don't want to do that. Also, by the way, this is a Russian boat assault crew, and they were getting ready for a boat assault in the night. Let's see how it went. Yeah, man, bro, and he's still gassing it. Oh,
they gotta be on something. They're on something,
dude. It's a 3-boat pileup. How does it happen? I don't even know. Oh my God, they flipped it over. Oh my God, they capsized the boat.
Oh, look, it's gonna happen again.
Oh my God, this guy's still going crazy. Oh, I need another. Oh my God.
What the hell? What the hell is that, a fishing line?
I don't know. It sounds like people are shooting now. They are.
Holy crap. It's a shootout.
Oh, and he's running onto the boat. Oh my God. It's absolute chaos.
What the hell? A dolphin got in. A dolphin's in the fight.
Bro, a velociraptor showed up. It went. It was like, bro.
And wait a minute, when did this happen? What the hell was this? This is insane.
This happened a couple of months back, but the footage came out today, and apparently it was a boat assault crew getting ready to go to an island in the estuary down here and take it, and they ended up running over each other, and some guy ended up running his boat out of control, so they started shooting at him, and then he brought the boat under control, but then another guy went out of control. It was just chaos. That's the best way to describe it, but that's generally what was happening.
That's crazy right there. It looks like they got in a fight and started shooting at each other before they can even get to the fight.
Man, meanwhile, in the distance, the Ukrainians just hear pop, 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 pop. What the hell? Like, they're like, what the hell is that? And they don't even know. But moving on from that and on out of the Kherson region and on down into Sevastopol, we also got to see the air defense firing in Crimea. Take a look at the clip. Quite a lot of it.
Да, вообще баран тоже.
Все, пошли нахуй.
Кто там?
Ебать.
Мамочка, за что мне такое наказание? За что нам всем такое наказание?
I like how when people film in Russia, they think that filming the floor and turning the camera down to the floor somehow like makes them invisible to like the activities going on outside. It's like, no, just like lift the angle up so that way we can see what you're recording at least.
Yeah, and they are terrible cameramen. But with that, it is time for us to move up to Kyiv to get the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 1,257 of the war. And so, without further ado, here is the speech. Peach!
Peach!
Шановні українці, сьогодні ми дякуємо нашим воїнам повітряних сил, їхній професійний день, героїчні люди. Сьогодні особисто їм подякував, відзначив нагородами, а також дуже важливі були доповіді щодо розвитку наших повітряних сил. Усіх елементів. І це бойова авіація, це наші зенітні ракетні війська, це радіотехнічні війська. Всі елементи отримують належну силу. Тільки за цей рік наші повітряні сили отримали «Міражі», бойові машини з Франції. Також додаткові F-16 будуть ще. І сьогодні ми затвердили наступні етапи розвитку бойової авіації, нові платформи, нові кроки в інтеграції наших сил з військами партнерів. Наша мета – це повна, ефективна інтеграція повітряних сил України з силами НАТО, що точно дасть більше можливостей українському захисту та водночас зробить нашу державу ще більш міцною частиною захисту Європи. Комплексно працює система управління нашою бойовою авіацією, її розвитком в Збройних силах, в Генеральному штабі, в Міністерстві оборони України. Я хочу подякувати всім фахівцям. І сьогодні я призначив Анатолія Кривоножка командувачем повітряних сил. Він майже рік виконував обов'язки командувача і багато всього зроблено. Важливо, щоб і надалі всі працювали саме командою в державних структурах, і з партнерами, і з професійною спільнотою. Була сьогодні також доповідь секретаря РНБО, зокрема про підготовку нових засідань Ставки, серед питань стан протиповітряної оборони, нові системи, які зайдуть в Україну. Готуємось до опалювального сезону, звісно, посилення ППО, антишахедні рішення, наше виробництво зброї – це один з елементів підготовки до зими. Також критична інфраструктура, її стан, необхідні рішення – все це теж питання на Ставку. Рустем Умєров доповів сьогодні ж про свою комунікацію з російською стороною. Готується обмін 1200 наших людей, які зараз в полоні. Ми маємо звільнити всіх наших військових, всіх наших цивільних. Як би не було складно. Керівник Офісу Андрій Єрмак доповів про комунікацію з нашими партнерами, зокрема з американцями. Сполучені Штати Америки налаштовані допомагати. Я хочу подякувати за це тиск на Росію дійсно може спрацювати саме так, щоб вони відчули наслідки затягування війни. І сьогодні провів також нараду щодо нашої санкційної політики. Підготовлені 3 санкційні пакети. І перший пакет вже сьогодні застосований. Санкції проти капітанів російського тіньового флоту. Будемо синхронізувати все це, всі ці пакети з нашими партнерами і так, щоб тиск працював в більшості юрисдикцій. Погодив на наступний тиждень синхронізацію санкцій партнерів у нашій юрисдикції. Необхідні рішення партнерів мають бути підтверджені українськими санкціями. І ще одне. Я хочу подякувати нашим людям в Херсонській області, у Миколаєві, у наших містах та громадах на півдні, на Харківщині, на Сумщині, всюди, де постійні російські удари по звичайним будинкам, по енергетиці і фактично просто по життю людей. Завжди є робота по відновленню. Завжди наші роблять максимум, щоб врятувати людей. Дякую вам, дякую кожному, хто так працює заради нашої держави, заради наших людей. Дякую всім, хто з Україною. Слава Україні!
And with that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 1257 of the news from around the world. And that's going to be moving us on to the second segment of this channel, of this show, where we get to talk to all of y'all. And boy, howdy, we can talk about anything as long as it's not religion, politics, or climate change. That one's being added on. That's going to be a third one now, because I didn't expect that one to get the kind of explosive response that it got from everyone. Because there was either people believing it that were really violent about it, and there was people who weren't believing it who also were really violent about it. So we're just generally going to put that one and bury it in the corner and never touch that one again. But nevertheless, it is time for us to move on into that second segment. But before we get on into it, I do have to say that the fundraiser tonight has done insanely well. We have raised $4,001 for Nova Ukraine, which is an amazing thing to see, and we love to see it. It's a wonderful and amazing thing to see that we have been able to raise $4,001 in support of Nova Ukraine. And Matthew, do we have any other top donors to call out? Do we? And who are they?
Oh, yes, we do. We have some more top donors to call off, and we do have a 50 from Greg Carrier, who just threw that in earlier, and a big shout out to you, Greg, for that support, by the way. And also, Old Warrior, he threw in some more as well that came in as anonymous. I don't think he told me the amounts, but I just want to give another shout out to Old Warrior, because he did throw in more support than I even called off earlier to the fundraiser, that is, and we do appreciate that very much to the both of you.
And I got to say a huge shout out to both of y'all, incredibly, for making sure to support the fundraiser and to help Nova Ukraine. I got to say that it's an absolutely amazing and incredible thing. But still, I've got to say massive thanks to everyone for supporting the fundraiser tonight. Y'all have done amazing and incredible work raising $4,001, which will be put to great use by Nova Ukraine overseas. But still, massive thanks to all of y'all so much once again. And also, Matthew, I had to do this really quickly because now that the whole thing's over, Matthew, this is the chat normally right here. This painting, this is the chat normally. Civil, well collected. This is the chat when climate change was brought up, man. Like, very different sort of an atmosphere.
Look at that. It's just, honestly, like, you know that Looney Tunes, like, scene where they start fighting? You know how they got so cheap with the Looney Tunes animations or the Tom and Jerry animations? They just had them, like, in a dust bowl, basically, like, fighting. That's how it turned into. Like, pull that up, Jamie. The dust bowl.
Let me see. Tom and Jerry fighting. Bro, what the hell are these pictures? What the helly? Bro, I don't even... Bro, all of them aren't even, like, the cloud pictures, dude. Like, this one... That's just him strangling them. You know, it's like, what the hell are these? None of them are...
Wait, maybe it was Looney Tunes. Like, punch in Looney Tunes fight scene or something. Like, I know I saw it. Like, they're not going to gaslight me on this one. I know I saw what I saw.
Let's see. Let's see here.
I remember the story was they used to... Oh, okay, we got it?
Yeah, right there.
Hey, there it is right there. Also, by the way, at least the theory behind why they did this with these fight scenes was it was a lot cheaper to animate this if you just simply did this Dust Bowl effect like this. So whenever the characters would start fighting, it was just like, okay, do the Dust Bowl drawing. That'll make it real simple for animating. At least that's the theory. Because if you have to animate all the different characters getting thrashed around and, you know, throwing punches and stuff like that, that's a hell of a lot more work for animating that, like when you're having to do it manually. So that's the story. But yeah, this is how the chat was right here. I think that might be me getting grabbed by my neck. Right there, getting strangled.
Either one of us, man, because I saw like half of the chat was like, "Shut the hell up, enforcer, you idiot! You ought to die because you're wrong." And then the other half was like, "Shut the hell up, enforcer, Matt! You ought to crawl in a hole and die because you're wrong." I was like, "Damn!" I was like, I did not think that this was going to turn out this way. And then people unsub it, and I'm like, okay, well, you know, it's like that's a real overreaction to it. And also, like, I don't know if people get this, and I don't mean to like try and like force this idea down everyone's throats, but like, you don't have to get in like an actual like love or hate fight with someone over a topic. Like, you can just disagree. Like, it's fine to just disagree. You don't have to like threaten someone or say that they ought to die or something crazy like that. I mean, that's just absolutely barbaric. You'll come from civilized nations. I know that because statistically everyone is from some country either in Asia, Europe, or North America on this channel for the most part. So it's not like it's not like this is a land racked with warfare where everything's got to be a life or death kind of a fight. You know, I just don't know why people turn it into that, because folks, you can just disagree and that's just the end of it. You know, like, you don't have to get into like blows verbally over a disagreement. You can just disagree and move on. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well, at least in my opinion. I'll be honest with y'all, I didn't expect that from that conversation, like whether people are going to disagree or agree. I thought it was going to be fairly civil. But anyways, with that, we are on to the questions themselves. Also, a huge shout out once again to the top donors in between the last segment and this one for helping this channel to keep on supporting American Western interest overseas through the amazing fundraisers we run on these Sundays. And with that, Matthew, what do we got?
All right. So believe it or not, we actually got some more super chats. And also, I want to make this clear off the bat, because if you've been around the channel for a long time, y'all will know this is the case. We are not the ones turning on super chats on the Sunday night fundraiser. We've never had super chats on those nights. The only reason they're coming in like tonight and the last Sunday that we did this on the fundraiser is because YouTube has a loophole now where if you click the button at the very top for the XP for like top fans, there's a button at the bottom that says buy a super chat. Typically, when we run a fundraiser, that button goes away, but with the new YouTube update, now there's a loophole included in it. So unless YouTube fixes that or changes it, it's apparently going to be like that way indefinitely. So just to make that clear, that we're not like trying to sneak in another way to monetize Sunday night fundraisers, just to make that perfectly clear. But since we have the super chats, though, we are going to thank the supporters and address them. And our first one here goes to Mule Headed, who puts in a $100 donation. And thank you very much, Mule Headed, for that support. And we do appreciate that very much. That's massive support, by the way, and it goes a long way with supporting the channel. And Enforcer, what say you?
I got to thank you for the massive support. We generally are not supposed to be getting support on Sunday night fundraisers, but I do massively thank you for supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running, because ever since that loophole has popped up, people have been using it a lot. And I got to thank you so much for supporting the channel and appreciating enough that you would go out of our way to support it, even on a Sunday fundraiser night. We're supposed to be helping out fundraisers, supporting Western American interests around the world. So a huge thanks to you once again. I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Luis Felipe, who puts in a 20 as well as a super chat. He said, hi from Portugal, and on X video footage from the hurricane has been posted, has in Russia and Italy at the same time. Not that it matters a lot, but I'm just curious, and congrats for the great job, and thanks for doing it.
And no problem at all, Luis Felipe. And I gotta say, a big hello to Portugal, a really cool country out there on the Iberian Peninsula. A really neat place, the Iberian Peninsula. Matthew, do you know why it's called the Iberian Peninsula?
Oh, why? Is it because it's a peninsula?
Because once at a time, Matthew, the Iberian people lived on this peninsula. So it was called the Iberian Peninsula. That's like I think the honest truth, if I remember correctly. But beyond that, I do have to thank you so much for the support, Luis Felipe. And I gotta say, a very interesting weather occurrence is happening around the area. I actually didn't know about that, and I thank you for sharing it. I don't really know what to make of it, because I'm not really a big weather person, more so war analysis and foreign policy stuff. But huge thanks to you once again. I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, it is time for us to move on into the live chats themselves. But really quickly, before we do, if y'all do not know this, this is actually a neat fact. Matthew, did you know that Spain, or Iberia as a province under the Roman Empire, was actually a very successful province because of the olive oil trade? Because most olive trees that grew in Rome that made olive oil were from Spain.
I didn't know that, but did you know this? That the naming convention for Spain, like how they came up with the name Spain, is not as straightforward as it seems. Obviously, when you try to, develop a country, try to form a country, it's a painful process. So the problem with Spain was it was so supremely painful. They took the S from supreme, like supremely painful, and they put pain behind it, so it became Spain.
That's actually pretty interesting fact right there.
It's straight bollocks.
Man, I'll have to tell you this though. Do you know how Portugal got its name?
Because it was in the gal was in the port, and they founded it.
They had a whole bunch of people down there, Matthew, who were Mughals, or the best way to put it is a mogul of the ports. And so they're like, damn, we ought to just call the whole country after these guys. So then they called it Portugal.
Damn, that's as bad as mine, honestly. I think you just leveled the playing field with that.
Bro,
also, by the way, I want to say this because that way nobody's like, I'm reporting this for misinformation. I'm spewing bollocks, by the way, just to be a dumbass, basically. So just to make that clear, I think everybody already knew that, but just to make that perfectly clear.
Knowing how angry people got in the last session about climate change, there are probably some people right now who are trying to report for misinformation. They're lying. Like it's a dad joke. It's a dad joke. But I tell you what, folks, I live in Spain without the S. But nevertheless, I'm just kidding, by the way. But also something interesting, folks, is that the French people were once the Gauls, if y'all do not know, and that's actually where the whole phrase "you don't have the Gaul" comes from. Like that's actually a serious one.
Oh, that's you're being dead serious on that?
Yeah, I'm actually being dead serious on that because the Vercingetorix led the Gauls in an uprising against the Romans to try and stop them from expanding into France, and it was generally considered a brazen sort of a thing to do, really bold, and they ended up losing, and Vercingetorix would die from being strangled to death in Rome after he was captured after the battle. I forgot the battle, but it was actually a battle directly against Julius Caesar himself, who was, of course, great at the whole idea of building forts in the middle of a battlefield. That's really why he won. But outside of that, that's generally where the phrase "you haven't got the Gaul" comes from. It comes from the Gaul people of France.
Huh, that's interesting. Honestly, what do the young people say now when they're being serious? What the TikTok brain rot? It's dead ass. Or something like that. I'm dead ass on that.
Man, bro, dude, I don't know why that's even a phrase because I don't even know how that comes around to mean that, dead ass.
Yeah.
It's how the hell? How the hell does that?
It's brain rot, man. It's brain rot. That's why.
Man, that's like that skibbity toilet shit. I can't stand new lingo. I feel like it's what happens in every generation, man. You get old and the lingo doesn't make sense anymore. Because honestly, man, how the hell does "hang tight" make any sense? You know what I mean? That's a phrase from the boomer generation. How the hell does that make any sense when you really think about it?
I don't understand any of the lingo, to be honest with you. Also, people are saying "no cap," "dead ass." I just don't get it. Me personally, I think it's just the young people desire to be different. All young people want to feel like they're rebelling against the system or something, or they want to feel different. So that's what it is, I think. But it's it's just cringy. But when you're young, I guess it's okay to be cringy to an extent. Not in Russia though. If you're cringy in Russia, they just lock you up. That's the end of the story. But everywhere else, you're free to be cringy. It's just you probably get mocked for it a little bit, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are cringe. A lot of people, including us, are cringe here in the States. But it's what makes us American, folks. And it's what unites us at our core at the end of the day. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, it is time for us to move on into some questions because we are actually starting to run overtime a little bit almost for a fundraiser night. So Matthew, what kind of live chats do we have?
All right, so we got a lot of good live chat questions tonight, and we're going to grab our Morse code decoders first on my mama, as Gabriel Graham said. And our Morse code decoders tonight are Paul Schultz, Kevin J, Mason Miami, Joni Dog, Norm Pritchett, Arabelle Garbo, Heroia Fluffiness, and Kush. And they said, day 1257 Morse message says, if you want to see how to respond to Russian aggression, look toward Poland for an example, and LLT, LOC.
And And y'all got that Morse code message correct. Man, whoever put that in must have been a genius. I'm just kidding, by the way. I put that in. I'm not really that smart. I'm kind of stupid sometimes. But beyond that, y'all got that correct. I got to congratulate the Least Spring Army Signal Corps for getting that correct once again, because y'all get that correct every single day of the week. And it's great to hear some fresh names in the Morse code decoder list. So a big shout out and congrats to all of y'all once again for getting that correct. And with that, it's time for us to move on into the questions themselves. And also, I see, let's see. I see someone saying something about France surrendering. That joke, I feel like that's such an undeserved joke, because historically, for the countries that have won the most battles throughout history, France is actually number one by a good handy margin. Like, a very much so. Like, France is the king of war, at least in terms of winning battles. The problem is that they lost that one in World War II, and they've never died it down since. Well, it's never died down since. And it's like a joke that's on France that is a stain because of what happened in World War II. I feel like it's very undeserved, because if there is a country that has surrendered more than any other, it actually would be the Germans, like, crazily enough. I feel like for as far as major conflicts, the only one I can think of that they didn't end up really surrendering. And I mean, they surrendered in the Napoleonic Wars, if you want to count Prussia as the predecessor state to Germany. They surrendered in the Napoleonic Wars. They ended up winning in the end, but that's only after everyone kind of came to help them out. And they also ended up getting a little bit of a spine. They lost the First World War. They lost the Second World War. So generally, as far as countries that lost a lot, it's kind of like the Germans get that claim, in my opinion, more so than the French. Because, I mean, the French didn't lose the First World War. Like, who lost both World Wars? It was the Germans. Who was beaten, at least for a small while, of one World War? France, and then they get all the credit for surrendering the most. Like, I feel like that's just I feel like that's such a wrong kind of a thing to do to the French. But, you know, I guess it is what it is. You know, every French gun is practically brand new. Fired twice and dropped once. But anyways, with that, it is time for us to move on into the next one.
All right, so moving into our live chat questions proper tonight, we have one here from Mystical, who said, what do you both believe is the chances of Russia collapsing before a full-out war? Honestly, I would say the odds of it are going down a little bit, because here's the problem. If India and China and Turkey are going to keep on buying Russian oil, which it looks like they probably will, then that's going to take away our leverage when it comes to secondary sanctions on the Russian economy. That was our main hope to causing Russia to collapse. So unless we can convince India to stop buying the oil, then we're in trouble when it comes to actually having leverage over Russia. And right now, Russia is getting support from North Korea. They're getting support from China. They're getting support from Iran. And they're also having enough times, they've stalled long enough that they're building up their weapons capacity. So in other words, we waited too late. We should have jumped on this a lot earlier this year. We didn't, but now we're playing catch up, and now Russia has gotten a little bit of a jump. So it's certainly not over yet by any means, but I would say Russia's probably not going to collapse unless the oil situation gets torn apart. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would generally have to agree with Matthew's assessment on that, to the point I really don't have too much to add. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And also, I see some people talking about the Germans. And I do want to say this. The Germans get the reputation they get because they're like the boogeymen of Europe. Like, they always look scary no matter what. I mean, look at them in any era. They're terrifying. They put skulls on their helmets. Like, that's not just a Nazi thing. That was a thing that was going on in World War I and before that. And it's like, that's terrifying, you know, like, to most people. And they are also, usually their uniforms are some sort of like a navy blue or a black of some sort of color. That's usually an intimidating color. So generally the Germans don't get that kind of credit for losing a lot of wars because they look scary. The French, on the other hand, they went into World War I looking like the clowns. Like, they were wearing bright red pants and bright blue tunics. It looked ridiculous. Well, they changed that pretty quickly, though, after 1914. In 1915, the uniform had completely changed. But really, though, like, honestly, I have a lot of respect for most European countries, because at some point in their history somewhere, they were absolutely beasting on everyone else for a little while. But generally, the French get such a bad rap militarily because they came up with so many revolutionary things. Like, they pretty much created the Swiss mercenary. Like, a lot of people don't know that, but Swiss mercenaries, or as they were called in the Renaissance age, the Switzers, which is where Switzerland comes from, were generally hired out by the French only. Sometimes they were hired out by the Germans, but mostly the French, to the point that the Swiss pretty much became an unofficial part of the French army through most of several hundred years, from about the 1500s to the late 1700s and early 1800s. But they were very damn good at what they did, the French. They ended up creating the Fusilier, the Zouave, a load of different kinds of things. I mean, the grenade itself, the word grenade comes from French, or is a bastardization of the French word for pomegranate, because grenades kind of look like a pomegranate a little bit in a sense. But the French have a lot going on, at least in terms of military prowess historically. And I mean, hell, they had such an impact on the British, which you could also argue were probably some of the most successful fighters the world over, as well. I mean, Britain and France are almost neck and neck for winning the most battles worldwide, but they were so impactful on the British that a lot of English words are French, or some variation of a French word. Like beef is a variation of the French word for cow. Because before that, you said, hey, give me a piece of that cow. You didn't say, give me some beef, and such things like that. So, you know, not to, like, I just feel like a lot of the disrespect the French get in terms of the military these days is so undeserved, because they also have a really good military even in the modern day. And then I saw someone bring up Dien Bien Phu, and yes, they did lose at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, and that was a whole deal. But at the same time, though, that was post-war France, and post-war France had a lot of problems. And they were also fighting in Algeria at the same time that was going on. So kind of like I get that they did lose at Dien Bien Phu, and that was another blow to French prestige right after World War II. But at the same time, though, in their credit, they were rebuilding their nation, and they had bigger fish to fry, at least in their opinion, in Algeria than they did in Vietnam, or French Indochina, as it was called. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so our next live chat question goes to Live Animal, who said, "What is the CIA's assessment of Putin's psychiatric state of mind?" Now, unfortunately, we can't speak on behalf of the CIA. That's going to be up to them on that one. But in my personal opinion, I would say that Putin's state of mind is certainly off his normal kilter. I would say that's definitely a certainty. He's gotten, like I've said for a long time, he got in over his head with the Ukraine war. He thought it was going to be quick, and they misjudged that situation terribly, as we found out. So ever since then, Putin's been desperate. He's been isolating himself. He's not been listening to advisors, and he's just been basically doubling down and doing that over and over and over. So I would say generally he's desperate. He knows that this is a very precarious situation. He's in private probably panicking, but in public he's trying to hold together this persona that he's a mastermind, even though clearly he miscalculated probably historically badly when it comes to Ukraine. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to agree. We don't really know the psychological profile of Putin, but he's definitely a narcissist, that's for sure. But beyond that, his decision making is also very illogical, in my opinion. Not that that's a CIA psychological report, that's just my personal opinion, but his decision making is very irrational on a foreign policy level, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense, really. And it's also from a great disadvantageous position, which at this point, generally the smart idea would be to disengage, but he continues to press forward, which makes no sense. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so our next one here goes to Joe Emily, who said, "How quickly would NATO have air superiority, and would NATO fighter bombers get involved even before Article 5 invokement, for example, a contingency?"
I would say that air superiority could be achieved over NATO territory within the opening days, most likely within 72 hours. Air superiority over the Russian Federation, however, or Western Russia and Kaliningrad, that could take months, because in the Gulf War, it took us months, because we're very meticulous in that process. We want to make sure to mitigate our losses and also make sure that our strikes are at an overwhelming superiority or advantage. So it would most likely take months to gain complete air superiority, but we generally would have at least well, not uncontested air superiority. It would be contested air superiority, but we still would be able to conduct air operations in support of our forces at any given moment throughout most of that conflict. So that would be my general take, because when you look at the figures of the air forces of Europe and then you include the United States, just the air forces of Europe alone could easily overwhelm the Russians, much less including most of the weight of the U.S. Air Force also in Europe, present in that conflict if it needed to be. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Danny B, the chef Danny B, and he says, "Do you think that we should get some jets and bombers in Diego Garcia and a courier fleet team near the area?"
I would say not necessarily right now, unless we are absolutely certain on bombing the Iranians or the Houthis. I don't really think we should be putting B-2s in Diego Garcia. It's a high humidity and salinity region, and that generally doesn't do the B-2s too well for their lifespan. So I generally would say that we ought to keep them back here in the United States at Whiteman Air Force Base, where they will be able to be shelf stable for longer, to put it that way. Because B-2s actually do have a expiration date. Humidity and salinity does a lot of bad things to a B-2 bomber from what we know. So they generally keep them at Whiteman because the humidity it can rise, but it doesn't rise extremely, and also the salinity content in the air around Whiteman is non-existent. So with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a question here from Run and Gunny. He said, "Is it possible that Russians refuse to launch nuclear weapons if they're ordered to do so, or overthrow Putin to avoid a nuclear war?"
We do know that they can refuse the order to fire. That did happen during 1985 during Operation Able Archer. But as far as them overthrowing the government, that I wouldn't be sure about. I have a feeling that the refusal to fire would most likely be followed by a severe reprimand. In the past, it was. But once they refuse to fire and the situation passes and they're not nuked, they don't follow along. Will continue to press forward with the order to fire after that. So they would refuse the order to fire in some instances, but the overthrow or attempted overthrow of the government would be highly unlikely still. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Rick. And Rick says, "Is Putin actually crazy enough to open up a second front with limited equipment and troops? And what would he actually seek to gain?" Well, the thing is, Rick, with my personal opinion, it would be insane to open up a second front with the Baltics. That's why I say that Putin would only do that if he gets super desperate. Like, for example, if the Russian economy is literally on the verge of collapsing, like a historic collapse, like to the point where it could threaten the entire Russian Federation as a whole, like the integrity of the government, then he might do something as crazy as opening a second front in the Baltics just to either distract or to try to buy time while his economy is going down the tubes. At least that's my theory. I think that's probably what it would be. So basically what he would seek to gain is basically to try to preserve his power for a little bit longer while his country's falling apart. But Enforcer, what say you?
That's what I'd also have to say. It's a desperate last-ditch situation. It's not one where he thinks that he has a handy way of winning and it'd be quick and easy. This is more so a last-ditch scenario, not even to win. It's more so to force the West into a negotiating table and to give Russia some limited concessions before they completely implode or collapse. Because there is no concept or idea, even in the Russian mind, that they would be able to stand up long or win a war against the West. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Jezza, who said, "I thought the U.S. was pulling all troops out of Europe. What happened to that?"
It changed. Generally, we were withdrawing from NATO, and we were also going to make everyone up there in spending to 5%. And now the only thing that's left over is that the spending is being increased to 5%, but U.S. forces are staying in Europe, and also on top of that, the U.S. is also staying in NATO. So most of that stuff was reversed. Generally because it didn't turn out to be that great of an idea in reality. So with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, at least from what we would know. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Avari Mandabratis, who says, "If Russia draws in NATO in a war in the Baltics, would the U.S. simultaneously go after Russia's Pacific and Arctic naval forces or guard themselves, waiting for China to act?"
I have a feeling that Russian actions in the Pacific would be incredibly limited, meaning that U.S. strikes on them would be quite small, if non-existent, and U.S. forces will largely be waiting to see what's going on with the Chinese. But if it's the outbreak of a total war in Europe, you can bet that there will be limited naval engagements in the Pacific against the Russian Pacific and Northern fleets. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And we have one from Kevin McGill. He said, "If this kicks off and Russia does attack the Baltics, China will attack Taiwan, the Middle East is going to go berserk with Israel, and North Korea is going to probably attack South Korea. What say you?" And now, Kevin, I'm going to call that the falling domino theory. That is a theory that a lot of people are bringing up. That if Russia were to take the drastic step of attacking the Baltics, which means essentially attacking NATO, that would be the cue for China to start invading Taiwan, to basically blitz NATO all at once and overwhelm our defenses. I think that's a decent theory. I mean, it's proven that China and Russia are coordinating very closely with one another, and they're separating into their own axis of the world with Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, etc. So that's not far fetched. We just don't know how deep that coordination is actually taking place, but it's certainly possible. It's not just a conspiracy theory. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that it is certainly possible, but at the same time, though, a lot of people may start to cool themselves down a little bit or try and reach the negotiating table, or just put it on hold for a little bit, because with situations like Israel and Iran, Israel may see that the U.S. support in that kind of a situation would be limited, so they might try and hold off and wait for the time when U.S. support could be plentiful. On the other hand, that could actually spurn the Chinese into trying to attack Taiwan, because they would understand that U.S. support to Taiwan would be more limited because the U.S. would be focusing its resources into Europe and the Pacific simultaneously. So I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And also, Mandy, I don't know if you saw this in the chat a second ago, but someone said, and this one was funny, so I have to point this one out. Someone said, it's a little bit weird that nobody in Europe is talking about that upcoming military exercise near Belarus, except for the Ukrainians. That's very strange. I don't know if you were like here earlier, man. I think you may have been, but we literally pulled up the very answer from the European Parliament. So if no one is talking about it in Europe, it's a little bit odd that the European Parliament itself, or the European Union, brought it up and answered it. So yeah,
I think he's talking about like their mainstream news isn't talking about it, and honestly, I would tend to believe him on that actually, because what's weird is when the Russian drones went into Lithuania twice, I literally was contacted by people living in Lithuania, and they were telling me that the Enforcer channel and also the other YouTube channels reporting on it were literally their only source that they were able to find that information, because the mainstream in Lithuania wasn't even reporting on it. Presumably, they were trying to prevent panic in their country, which is understandable. But to totally like neglect an entire major story just to keep people in the dark to avoid a panic potentially, I mean, in my opinion, it seems a little bit more reckless than just informing them. In my opinion, so I wouldn't say it's too far fetched to say that maybe they aren't reporting on these Zapad 2025 Belarus Russian exercises to avoid people getting concerned about it. Maybe it's possible.
Yeah, but at the same time, though, to say that literally nobody is talking about it in Europe when the European Parliament itself of the European Union addressed the topic and then said it could possibly lead to the outbreak of war, or could be a cover to build up for a war, that's like saying literally nobody in Europe is talking about it but the Ukrainians. That would still be untrue, because the European Union's parliament directly brought it up and talked about it, and the fact that it could be a build up to war.
Maybe so. I don't think a lot of people watch the parliamentary hearings and briefings and things like that. That's something that, like for example, C-SPAN in America, most people don't watch it. The people that watch it are already informed, so they don't need that necessarily. So, most people that are scrolling TikTok daily or like watching their mainstream normal channels, they're not going to hear about it.
Oh, and also I see the terrorist said I meant mainstream media. Oh, sorry, I thought you meant like literally nobody, like including like the governments of Europe. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Sorry, I thought you were like trying to be a bot and be like, that's weird. Ukraine's the only one mentioning it. Kind of like how people do. Oh, Iran isn't a threat to us, but it's a threat to the Israelis. It's kind of like the same thing with that people bring up, like the conspiracy theory stuff. That's what I thought you were doing, Tara. Sorry about that. That's why I was like, I was like, come on, man. But yeah, nobody in the media, at least in the Baltic states, talked about it, but there is always a little murmuring here and there in Europe about it, and it does make it over there in the news sometimes. Like, for example, when Pistorius, who was the German defense minister, goes, the war is going to happen, then they'll make it through the news around there, like Der Spiegel or something like that. But generally, though, you would be correct in saying that a lot of their mainstream news in Europe doesn't really cover it all too much. But it is still mentioned and talked about a lot in government circles. And for the folks who are paying attention to those governmental circles in these countries, it is very clear at this point that pretty much the entirety of Europe is preparing and mobilizing for the eventuality of a war with Russia, or the possibility of a war with Russia. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to AF Kaplan, who said, is there another way besides tariffs to get India to stop buying the Russian oil?
Let's see. There really isn't any other way. You pretty much have to threaten economic leverage against them to make them stop. Because trying to just encourage them, hey, don't do that. They're probably not going to listen too much. So you have to give them a little bit of the carrot and the stick. And this time around, it's a little bit of the stick to stop them from buying Russian oil. So I hope that addresses that the best I can, because there really isn't any other way that we could go about that rather than threatening the implementation of sanctions if they continue to buy it. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, it is time for us to move on into the final question of the night. And so, who was the lucky last person to put in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is going to be Shinoe, who said, did Turkey also not invoke Article 5 when they got attacked by Syria and they got patriots? I think the Article 5 was only invoked one time in history, and I think that was directly following, literally one day after the 9/11 terror attacks. I believe that's the only time it's been invoked, but correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that actually is the only time it's been invoked. It didn't appear that the Turks did that. I think generally because the Turks considered the Syrian situation to be their own situation. And also, technically, Turkey conducted a ground offensive into Syria, pretty much unprompted for the large part, to create a sanitary zone, which means that they were operating offensively at that point, and they weren't really subject to any Article 5 protections, because anything in response to that was defensive on Syria's part, and Turkey was operating in an offensive manner, possibly, or that could have been an explanation for it. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Great question, though. And with that, we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I've got to thank you all so much once again for watching tonight. We were able to see a peak viewership of 18.2 thousand people, along with 154,000 people who watched the stream before it ended. I've got to thank each and every one of y'all so much once again for being here and watching tonight. And not only that, I've got to thank all the folks who raised $4,066 for Nova Ukraine on tonight's fundraiser, and also the folks who went out of their way to super chat the channel. We've never had to consider that until the YouTube loophole, but a big thanks to y'all for supporting the channel nonetheless. And so with that, we will be seeing you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 48 hours of news from around the world. And if there is a short war video to be made tomorrow, I will be the one making it for all of y'all to see if there is enough news for that day. And so with that, we will see you all then. Good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, long live the Lee Spring Army, and the Lee Spring Army will never die.
And good night to you all, folks, and thank you all once again for smashing that fundraiser goal tonight and hitting the $4,000 mark, which is well above the goal, and we do appreciate that very much once again for another successful Sunday fundraiser to help Ukraine. And also a huge shout out, by the way, to all 160,000 plus people that were here by the end of the stream tonight, and we appreciate every single one of you, and we will see you all on Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, because of course tomorrow, Monday, is our only day off from the stream, and then we get right back to it on Tuesday. And if there is a short war video, the Enforcer will be making it. So once again, thank you all, and of course, Slava Ukraine, Heroem Slava, get some rest, and good night.